Recording by Esther. Habits That Handicap by Charles B. Towns. Chapter 6. Help for the Hard Drinker. The people of the world in general, and especially the people of the United States, are asking more questions about the cost of alcohol. Not its cost in money, but its cost in men. These questions, which statistics cannot answer, which indeed can never be definitely answered, but we know enough to be assured that if answers could be given, they would be appalling. With increasing unanimity, the thinkers of the whole world are saying that alcohol is found the greatest of humanity's curses. It does no good whatever. It does incalculable harm. A dozen substitutes may be found for it in every useful purpose which it serves in medicine, mechanics, and the arts. Its food value, of which much has recently been said, is not needed, and it has worked greater havoc in the aggregate than all the plagues. If not another drop of it should ever be distilled, the world would be the gainer, not the loser, through the circumstance. Yet the use of alcohol as a beverage is continually increasing. The number of its victims sums up a growing total. Sentimentalists have failed to cope with it, and the law has failed to cope with it. In combating it, the world must now find some method more effective than any it has yet employed. When we consider excessive drinkers as a class, we find that a large number of alcoholics are born with tendencies which make alcohol their natural and almost inevitable recourse. As a rule, they are naturally highly nervous, or, through some systemic defect, crave abnormally the excitation which alcohol confers. For these reasons, granting favorable opportunity and no great counterbalancing check, they are foredoomed to drink in excess. Some are predisposed to alcoholism by an unstable nervous organism bequeathed to them by an intemperate parent or other ancestors. Others are drinkers because they do not get enough to eat, or fail for other reasons than poverty to be sufficiently nourished, and others, possessing just the favorable type of physique, become alcoholics through worry or grief. All these kinds of people are victims of a habit which, properly speaking, they did not initiate, and which, therefore, censure must be very largely tempered. Yet they are generally treated as though they had perversely brought about their own disease, a course not more reasonable than the punishment of people for developing nephritis or cancer. The demand for a more effective as well as a more logical treatment of alcoholism has even greater urgency than comes out of this injustice. Much of our best material falls victim to this disease. By general admission, the alcoholic often possesses many qualities of mind and temperament which the world admires and pronounces of the utmost value when rightly developed. Even the careless weakling who drinks to excess is proverbially likely to be generous, magnanimous, warmly impulsive, even quixotic. The finest sensibilities, the most delicate perceptions, and the most enthusiastic temperaments, from all of which qualities great constructive results may be expected, are notably most exposed to alcoholism. A far greater number of its victims than the offhand moralist is inclined to concede have admirable sturdiness of will and dogged persistence. With less, perhaps, they would not have become excessive drinkers. They are alcoholics because with the help of stimulants they have habitually forced themselves to overwork, to bear burdens of responsibility beyond their normal strength, or to overcome physical obstacles like poor health, eye strain, and insufficient nourishment. The man who drinks is not necessarily depraved, but under the influence of stimulant he is very likely to drift into associations and environments which will lower his standards until he becomes irresponsible, unadmirable, or even criminal. Are alcoholics getting a fair chance? It is perhaps going too far to say that most alcoholics have not been given a fair chance by their bodies, their temperaments, or the actual conditions of their lives. The question is, are they getting a fair chance from society? Society whose experience has demonstrated that it must in some way protect itself from them? At present, the only public recognition of the alcoholic is manifested through some form of penalization. He loses his employment. He is excluded from respectable society. In extreme cases, he is taken into court and subjected to reprimand, fine, or imprisonment. Nothing is done to bring about his reform, except as the moral weight of the non-remedial punishment may arouse him to his peril and set his own will at work. Instances where this occurs are rare, because the crisis always comes when, through the influence which alcohol has wrought upon him, his brain has been befogged and his will weakened. Society does virtually nothing to awake that will or to assist its operation. The man whose drinking has so disarranged him physically or mentally that he is obviously ill is, it is true, taken to the alcoholic ward of some hospital, but even there no effort is made to treat the definite disease of alcoholism. For example, Bellevue and Kings County hospitals, where New York's 2 alcoholic wards exist, are institutions devoted specially to the treatment of emergency cases. As a matter of course, the alcoholics taken to them are merely sobered up. As soon as they are sobered and have achieved sufficient steadiness of nerve to make their discharge possible, they are turned out again into the liquor-ridden city, with their craving for the alcohol which has just mastered them no weaker, with their resolution to resist its urging no whit stronger, than they were before the crises in their alcoholic history engulfed them. There is as yet no public institution in New York where a man, either as a paying or as a charity patient, may go for medical treatment designed to alleviate the craving for liquor. No organized charity makes provision for the medical treatment of the alcoholic. Only 3 states in the Union attempt to provide more competently than New York State does for this class of unfortunates. The provision they make progressively treats men convicted of drunkenness in the courts with surveillance, threat, colonization, and finally perpetual exclusion from society. Massachusetts has a colony for inebriates, New York is developing one, and Iowa has had one for several years. This, then, is at present the treatment accorded by the public to the victims of this serious disease. There are no clinics devoted to the study of alcoholism, although it is the ailment of probably 1/3 of the sick people in the world today. Those who feel disposed to question this statement will be convinced that it is reasonable, if they but make account of the private sanatoriums dealing exclusively with alcoholics, in and near New York, and indeed dotting and surrounding all our large cities. Connecticut, New Jersey, and Illinois will show a startling number, and it must also be remembered that many of the cases of disease other than inebriety treated in all public hospitals have histories more or less alcoholic, and that the insane asylums are crowded with those gone mad through drink. It is demanded of common sense, not of sentiment alone, that this situation should be altered. Provision never has been made really to help even the man who, having lost control, is anxious to regain it. Inquire of the United Charities in New York and of similar organizations in other cities, and you will learn that they are doing most intelligent work in the treatment of tuberculosis, but that alcoholism is getting only condemnation and punishment, not curative methods. Yet there probably are 40 alcoholics to every consumptive. Neglect is almost universal, and where that change cannot be brought, there the errors are incredible and continual. Many are charitable toward the drunkard, giving him their dimes when he begs for them, and thus promoting his inebriety. But society as a whole ignores him until he forces its attention through his helplessness, or often through some sin, which might be more rightly charged to alcohol rather than to any natural criminal tendency in the man's nature. Alcoholics should be treated as invalids. The physician, as things are, can do little with the sufferer from any ailment if his system at the time is impregnated with alcohol, for the alcohol may very likely prove an antidote to the medicines, or, if it does not, may prevent the patient from taking them. An alcoholic does not keep engagements. He cannot be expected to take doses as prescribed by his physician. An alcoholic who is also ill of something else is doubly ill, but he usually gets treatment only for his secondary illness. No man who has lost control through stimulants is well, and until he has been definitely treated, he cannot be expected to act normally. The world does not yet know how to deal with him. Sequestration, as it is usually practiced, trips round Cape Horn, weeks spent in the woods where liquor cannot be obtained, will never do it. Not only must the physical yearning be eliminated, but the mental willingness to drink must be destroyed before reform can be accomplished. It is this point that the sentimentalists are wont to fail. A promise made by one in whom the craving for the stimulant exists cannot properly be considered binding, for such a one is not responsible for what he promises. If body proves stronger than the mind in such a battle, he is merely an unfortunate, not really a liar or a weakling. The world's loss through alcohol has been incalculable. No community ever existed which could afford to relinquish the services of all its citizens who drink to excess, or even of those who frequently get drunk. Yet society has continually maintained that when encountering the alcoholic it has crime, not disease, to deal with. Hence the crudely ineffective idea of penalization as a preventative. In general, the nearest approach which has been made towards physiological treatment, beyond of course the mere sobering up in an occasional hospital of patients made delirious by drink, has not been through medicine, but regimen, and this regimen has invariably included sudden and forced abstinence. This remedy is worse than the disease. It rarely helps and sometimes kills. I have seen many men who had been pronounced insane after they had been deprived of alcoholic beverages without proper treatment, but whose minds became perfectly clear as the result of the definite medical care their cases really required. Numbers of far from hopeless alcoholics are yearly being sent to our insane asylums, where there is little chance of their recovery. I think, furthermore, by merely depriving an alcoholic of alcohol without eliminating his desire for it, we are likely to force him into something worse. Thus, the attempt to enforce abstinence upon the man who wants to drink is not only ineffective but destructive. In making this statement, I do not wish to be understood as being opposed to the prohibition of the sale of alcoholic beverages. Indeed, I should favor the most drastic restrictions prohibiting the sale of alcohol. If there was never another ounce of alcohol manufactured, the world would be none the loser, either medicinally or commercially. My reason for making this statement is that prohibition of the sale of alcoholic beverages has been largely defeated because there have not been the proper safeguards thrown about the manufacture and sale of drugstore concoction that can be had in any quantity as substitutes for alcoholic stimulants. And I think the most drastic legislation that could possibly be created on this subject should be enacted and enforced against the druggist selling over their counters such concoctions. The late Dr. Ashbel P. Grinnell, for 17 years Dean of the Vermont Medical College, studied this phase of the subject, gathering interesting statistics. After Vermont's adoption of prohibitory legislation, he sent out to wholesale and retail drugstores, general stores, and groceries that carried drugs as part of their stock a letter in which he enclosed blanks calling for specific information concerning the sales of habit-forming drugs. Such was his personal standing in the state that he received responses from all but 2 or 3 of those whom he addressed, and these indicated that such sales had swelled rapidly until they indicated a daily consumption equal to 1 1/2 grains of opium or its alkaloids for every man, woman, and child in the state. This vast increase in the number of dangerous drugs he attributed solely to the prohibition of the sale of liquor. Thus it may be argued that the attempt to enforce abstinence upon the man who wants to drink is not only ineffective but destructive. Society may thus save itself from a few drunkards, but it is likely to get lunatics or drug fiends in their place. Reform cannot be attained by punishment. At the foundation of the present treatment of the alcoholic is usually the idea that threatening with punishment can be effective. Actual experience and the slightest examination prove this to be preposterous. Many a man who drinks when he knows he should not does so because he cannot control himself, and he who has lost his self-control is obviously irresponsible. A threat, or the remembrance of a threat, cannot restrain him. A man who had committed a crime while drunk, but whose whole career had otherwise been reputable, was sentenced to life imprisonment. After he had served 6 years, his friends presented so strong a case to the governor that he was pardoned, but with the warning that if he took one drink he might be returned to prison to complete his sentence. An excellent illustration of the slight influence of fear upon the alcoholic is furnished by the fact that within a very short time he was arrested for public drunkenness. Punishment breeds rebellion, and when you make a man rebellious, you are most unlikely to reform him. Punishment has never yet cured a disease. The inflamed brain not only carries grudges, but is almost sure to intensify them. If a man is discharged from his employment, or arrested at a time when he is in the abnormal alcoholic state, the effect on him cannot be reformatory. It must be to arouse his resentment, not his repentance. The employer who discharges a good man from his position because of drunkenness not only fails to deal intelligently with the man or with the subject, but may very likely be committing a crime against society by robbing it of a useful citizen, and at the same time forcing a useless one upon it. A man taken to court for drunkenness should with great care be properly classified. It should be determined whether he is an habitual drunkard, an occasional drunkard, or an accidental drunkard. There may be hope for the occasional drunkard. There is invariably hope for the accidental drunkard. If one of these is found to have employment at the time of his arrest, great care should be exercised not to let the fact that he has been arrested prejudice his employer against him, and as far as possible he should be spared humiliation. Nothing will more quickly unfit a man for anything worthwhile than humiliation. To punish such a man with a prison term will help no one. Neither should he be sent back to his liberty without some recognition of the fact that he has been drunk and irresponsible. Any police officer, and more especially any police court reporter, will testify that almost every man who, having been arrested for drunkenness, is discharged from custody without penalty, for one reason or another, social position, political importance, or previous good character record, will find a saloon within 2 blocks of the court and take a drink on the way home. He will probably not get drunk. The impression made by his arrest will remain too strong to permit that. But he will take a drink, and that and other drinks will help time drive from his mind the memory of the arrest, the cell, the court. And what is true of him who has been arrested and discharged is also true of him who has been arrested and imprisoned. Punishment fails utterly to reform the alcoholic. Nor is colonization more effective, except for the hopeless cases. It means segregation. A man once said to me, "I want to be helped, but not at the cost of compulsory association with others seeking help." I know that to be thrown into an unavoidable contact with those worse than myself would hopelessly degrade me. I should not be willing to risk that, no matter how good the treatment might do me. Colonization of the occasional alcoholic stamps him only a little less deeply than his stripes are sure to stamp the criminal who is sent to prison. And its effect upon him and his family are not more desirable than they would be if the process made exactly that of him. He is likely to be barred from employment after his discharge from the colony, and thus find it impossible to re-establish himself. Moreover, during the period of sequestration it is difficult to devise a plan for the care of the wives and children of those sent into seclusion. At a time when nothing in the way of betterment can be expected of him unless he regains confidence in himself, such treatment does not strengthen but cripples a man's spirit. Surveillance after his return will work on his imagination, cowing him into morbidness, until that alone will first weaken his will and then break it down. Too great emphasis, therefore, cannot be placed upon the viciousness of colonization for any but the first of the three cases into which I have said that all men charged in court with drunkenness should be carefully separated. Colonization of the hopeless is advisable only because such men, before they have descended to that stage, have cost their friends and society all that it is advisable to spend on them. If the man who is worth while is to be saved, it must be without the application to him of the brand. So much for the existing public methods of dealing with the alcoholic. The most usual private method is for a man's family or friends, when he has lost control, to send him to some place where he can get a grip on himself. But he often does not receive, in such a place, any more than in the hospital or prison, that specialized treatment which can make that regained grip effective. General treatment, accompanied by a gradual withdrawal of stimulant, will restore his bodily strength, with the result, in 9 cases out of 10, that when he emerges from the seclusion he is able to drink more than he was before he was sequestered, and will be sure to come to grief more quickly. In most cases his craving and need for stimulant are in no degree decreased, and in consequence he will frequently relapse while going to the railway station on the homeward journey. An even graver danger is that while still in full possession of the alcoholic habit, he will in addition contract the hypodermic habit, and any drug habit developed in the alcoholic is the most difficult of cases to deal with successfully. If he does relapse, his friends will almost surely hold him blameworthy and impatiently abandon him as hopeless, believing everything to have been done which can be done. In reality, nothing at all useful has been done to help him. He is a sick man, and no attack whatever has been made on his disease. Complete mental change must precede reform. This brings us to the kernel of the matter. No man who has become addicted to the use of alcohol can possibly abandon it unless he has first undergone a complete mental change, and in 99 cases out of 100 this alteration of mental state will not come until he has experienced a physical revolution. The reason for this is simple. Excessive use of alcohol really deteriorates the body and brain tissue, and tissue degeneration transforms for the worse the entire physical and mental makeup of a man. The confirmed alcoholic is in a state which, save in rare instances, nothing short of specialized medical treatment can correct. Mere general building up of bodily tone is as ineffective with alcoholics as is enforced deprivation or punishment. I emphasize this point particularly because many men are afraid to take any treatment for alcoholism lest through it they lose their standing with themselves or with their neighbors. Self-respect must be protected at every stage of the struggle as the patient's only hope. My purpose here is to show that the only chance of reforming most alcoholics lies in giving them opportunity through this physiological change to re-establish confidence in themselves. In setting about the business of treating an alcoholic, the first step is to realize that he is in an abnormal mental state. To moralize or to appeal in the name of sentiment to a warped and twisted mind is, I believe, sheer waste of time. To the man who has lost control, it must be first restored before he can be put to thinking. You cannot expect the distorted alcoholic brain to be honest with you or with itself. I cannot emphasize too strongly the harm that may come out of simply depriving the chronic alcoholic of his stimulant. I know that there are many relatives and friends, and even physicians, who, out of pure desperation, feel that they have accomplished much when they are able to put a man where he is unable to get his drink, irrespective of the amount which he has been accustomed to take. I consider the chronic alcoholic one of the most important cases in medicine to deal with successfully. Strange as it may seem to the layman, and it is just as strange to the physician, to such a case there is absolutely no other form of artificial stimulants that will take the place of alcohol, and when a patient is deprived of his accustomed stimulant, within 24 hours he begins to drift into delirium tremens, which means that the patient is a very sick man, and unless he is properly treated, will, if he lives through the active period of delirium, drift into a wet brain, or in other words, alcoholic insanity. And even if the patient survives the latter illness, a large percentage of such cases prove in the end to be hopelessly insane, and about 80% of the delirium tremens cases that do not get proper medical help die. It is a very serious matter dealing with the chronic alcoholic. Something definite must be done for such a case. Deprivation is impossible. Simple reduction is sometimes a failure. Nothing short of a definite medical hospital work will unpoison this sick man and avoid the complications of delirium, wet brain, or possible hopeless insanity. The second step is to give the patient that definite medical treatment which will correct his physical condition. Once this change has been effected, you have a man whose system is no longer crying out for liquor, with every nerve a quiver for it, every tissue thirsting for it. There have been reforms from alcoholism which were not preceded by this physiological change, but they have been rare. The physiological metamorphosis may be accomplished from without, by means of treatment, without assistance from the patient other than mere acquiescence. The mental change can be assisted from without. It cannot be accomplished or maintained by any one except the patient. Despite himself, a man may be successfully treated for other ailments, but not for alcoholism. By an intelligent subsequent attitude, friends or physicians may help to restore self-confidence, but that is all they can do. After the desire for it once has been eliminated, the patient cannot afford to take any alcohol whatever, and after a proper change of mental attitude he will not wish to. From alcohol he must abstain altogether, even in illness. Let no recovered alcoholic risk relapse because alcohol seems to his physician to be desirable as a medicine. Indeed, the most extreme care should be exercised to avoid medicines containing alcohol, even in small percentages, and this will bar most of the proprietary remedies. When he is hungry, let the recovered alcoholic eat. When he is weary, let him be sure to rest. When he feels ill, let him be sure to consult without delay a competent physician. None of these conditions indicate a necessity for alcohol. Thus the man who is not hopeless may be saved. Society owes every alcoholic a fair opportunity to reform. It may be questioned if it owes him repeated opportunities. Many alcoholics never have been, and probably never could be, useful citizens. Waste of money and emotion on them is lamentable to contemplate. The sums at present thus hopelessly thrown away would aggregate enough really to restore every alcoholic actually curable. Sentimentalists do not like to admit the limitations of useful help, but those limitations do exist, and we should reckon with them. If we do, the man really curable will have all the better chance. A test of the worthy. It is possible to discriminate between the curable and the incurable by the simplest of expedients. Usually the question, What is this man willing to do in return for help? Will, with its answer, also supply the answer to the inquiry as to his future. No man of sufficient mental fibre to make helping him of any actual value is willing to accept charity. Even if he finds himself at the moment unable to repay the debt involved, he will be anxious to make it a future obligation. My 15 years of experience have proved to me that the sense of personal obligation is of great moment in this matter. Even when it becomes necessary for a relative, employer, or friend to assist a patient by the payment of his bills, it should be regarded as part of the treatment to consider this a loan which must be repaid and not a gift. It follows, sadly enough, that the most hopeless alcoholic is the rich young man to whom financial obligations incurred for treatment mean nothing whatsoever, and to whom the responsibility of employment is unknown. Indeed, it seems well nigh impossible to reform the vagrant rich. The man who thinks that giving up his alcohol is primarily a privation, although he may admit the definite necessity of this privation, is not likely to reform permanently. But there is hope for that one who declares without apology that drinking is a bad business, and that he wishes to be helped to stop it. I cannot say with too great emphasis that self-respecting pride is the main hope of the alcoholic. It must not be overlooked, however, that it is the pride of the curable alcoholic which makes him difficult to reach. To try to help such a man when it is too late is a pitiably usual experience, for not until it is too late does the pride of such a man allow him to apply for help. The man who says, "I will not drink today," and finds himself compelled to, who promises himself but cannot keep his promise, is the man who most deserves help, and is most likely to yield some sort of good return on an investment made in him. Indeed, it is the rare alcoholic, curable or incurable, who of his own initiative submits himself to treatment. Friends must assist, but while the importance of such friendly service cannot be overestimated, it must be of the right kind, or it will be worse than useless. Friends of alcoholics too often either sentimentalize or bully when they go about the task of helping, or they allow too little time for the accomplishment of the reform. Successful business men are specially likely to act childishly when dealing with the mighty problem of assisting alcoholics to their feet. They are likely to affirm that there is no excuse for any man who yields to drink. If they have given help before, they are prone to call attention to the fact that their beneficiary has not recompensed their kindness by reforming, and declare, for instance, that they will pay his board another week, but that will be the end of their endeavour. This spirit, and it is the usual spirit, can accomplish nothing, and the money spent in this and other ill-considered and half-hearted efforts to save men has not decreased, but has increased the dissipation it has sought to stop. Even relatives and intimate friends are likely to become weary of a case which shipment to some private institution, deportment to a ranch, or embarkation on a sailing vessel for a long voyage has failed permanently to help. Such treatment works no reforms, or almost none. Until the cause of drinking is removed, travel from one place to another in an effort to obtain reform by breaking up old associations will be of no avail, but will instead repeat the experience of the old woman in the fairy tale who was bothered by a goblin. When she uprooted herself from her old home and sought another, the goblin, hidden in a churn, went with her. It was the old woman, not the cottage, he was haunting. It is the man, not his environment, in which the alcoholic habit finds its stronghold. When a patient, by intelligent treatment, has been put into a receptive state of mind, he should be told to look up his old associates, and to them declare himself upon the liquor question. If they are friends, they will congratulate him. If they are not, he will have gained by making certain of it. And there is very little danger that, after he has seen them, he will wish again to make intimates of them. That after, in his sober senses, he has examined the surroundings which they frequent, he will be willing to return to them. Being himself normal, he will wish for normal men as friends. Being far more fastidious than he was when he was an alcoholic, the old haunts will find him with disgust. This declaration of himself the man must himself make. Good friends may help him otherwise, and chiefly by refraining from the slightest thing which may by any chance tend to decrease his self-respect and his confidence in his own power to stay reclaimed. What a man needs is a new mind on the subject. End of chapter 6. By Esther. Habits That Handicap by Charles B. Towns. Chapter 7. Classification of Alcoholics. Alcoholics are more easily classified than drug takers. With few exceptions, alcohol users have their beginnings in social drinking. Not a few women and boys have had their first taste of alcohol, and may even have acquired a definite alcohol habit through the small quantities administered as stimulants by physicians. But in a general way, it is as easy and just to absolve the physician from responsibility in the matter of alcoholism as it is easy and just to put a heavy responsibility upon him in the case of the use of drugs. The demand for stimulants. In these days, all mankind searches for exhilaration. The instinctive demand for it is an inevitable result of the artificial social system which we have built up. We work beyond our strength, and naturally feel the need of stimulants. We play beyond our strength, and as naturally need whips for our vitiated energies. The greatest social disaster of all the ages occurred when first alcoholic stimulation, which is only one step in advance of alcoholic intoxication and narcotization, found its place as an adjunct of good fellowship. All humanity turns in one way or another to artificial stimulants, and while alcohol and narcotics are the worst among these, we cannot slur the fact that many who would shun these agents as they would a pestilence turn freely to milder but not altogether harmless stimulants such as tea, coffee, and tobacco. I do not purpose to go into a long dissertation upon the chemical peculiarities of alcohol. I do not propose to discuss the value or peril of alcohol as food. There are plenty of published chapters telling exactly what alcohol is. I feel that it is my mission to do none of these things, but to endeavor to reveal to the student the most effective way of dealing with a patient who has drifted into a definite alcoholic addiction. The man who cannot be saved. It seems impossible to arouse any enthusiasm or sympathy for the human derelict whose natural weakness is inevitably such that one taste of alcohol means a gallon, and final wreck and ruin. The human cipher plus alcohol or minus alcohol, it matters not which, means nothing. It may be true that alcohol subtracted from nothing leaves nothing, but it is certain that alcohol added to nothing may mean a peril to society and a serious charge upon it. A man who has achieved nothing up to the point where he has become addicted to excessive alcoholism will rarely repay the trouble involved in an effort to preserve him from his folly, although of course his preservation from it might be of general social service as a means of saving the public money that otherwise might be expended in the reparation of the work of his destructive tendencies, besides the public expense involved in police, court, and prison economy that prevents him from the opportunity of indulgence. But thousands of decent men annually yield to alcohol and are wrecked by it. The decent and potentially valuable citizen who, through overwork, worry, sickness, sorrow, or even through a mistaken conception of social amenities or duties, drifts into excessive alcoholism, is a victim of our imperfect social system, and repays remedial effort. Furthermore, such a man is invariably savable if he himself applies for salvation, assists with his own will in its application to his case, and pays his own money for the cure. The proportion of the cases that can be saved among the general run of alcoholics who are sufficiently prosperous or have sufficiently prosperous friends to make them likely to come under my direct observation, amounts to about 1/4 of the whole. It will be observed that this claim for alcoholics is far below the claim which I have made for drug users. Where it is found that a case of excessive alcoholism has grown out of a lack of a normal sense of responsibility, where excessive alcoholism has reached the point at which deterioration of the moral nature has set in, or where the social and financial entanglements already have resulted, a problem is presented which is complicated and even very doubtful. In such a case, far more than definite medical treatment must be resorted to before a complete restoration of the unfortunate to social usefulness can be hoped for. The naturally irresponsible person, or the person already led into irresponsibility by alcoholism, may be regarded as an almost hopeless proposition. This is peculiarly the case where no financial obligation can be imposed upon the patient as a part of the treatment. The very poor, for whose treatment someone else must pay, and the very rich, to whom the sum paid for treatment is a matter of no moment, are almost equally hopeless. My long experience has taught me that the man who does not feel a financial responsibility for that which is done for him is usually the least promising of all the cases brought to me. I have found it necessary to regard as a definite part of my treatment the imposition of a monetary obligation. If, for example, the employee of a person or a corporation is sent to me for relief from alcoholic tendencies by his employer or employers, I invariably refuse to accept the case unless it is agreed that the sum paid for the patient's treatment shall be held against him as an obligation to be repaid as soon as possible to those who have advanced it. Even the man who is curable will fail in a physiological realization of the misfortune into which he has actually fallen through alcoholic indulgences unless he himself must pay the fiddler. In the case of a working man who is brought to me for treatment by his employers, I make a minimum charge as a rule, but only on the condition that, with all due speed, it is deducted from his pay envelope. In the case of men of a higher order, as professional employees, heads of departments, etc., I insist in a general way upon following the same line of procedure. I cannot too strongly emphasize my absolute conviction that it is invariably a waste of money and time for an employer or an employing company to attempt to help alcoholics by means of free medical treatments. No good will come from this in the long run, as it never will prove to be worth while. Thus we may classify very rich, utterly poor, and irresponsible inebriates as among the hopeless. From every moral, social, and economic point of view, the hopeless inebriate is a liability to the world at large. Throw him in the sieve of respectability, and soon or late he will always prove small enough to slip through the meshes. Colonization of alcoholics. Among such cases will be found fit subjects for colonization, and these are the only ones who should be treated in this way. No greater social mistake is possible than the colonization and segregation, either in sanatoriums or inebriate farms, of other than utterly hopeless alcoholic cases. The next greatest mistake, undoubtedly, is society's failure to segregate those who are utterly beyond the pale of hope. These men and women will be less of a burden to their friends and to the community after segregation. Their segregated existence will not constitute a threat against society of the present and future generations. It is my opinion that these people, men and women, rich and poor, should be sterilized and put at work. It is possible that this plan, if properly carried out, might develop some institutional effort worth while. That, at present practiced, means a waste of time and money. It should be borne in mind that deprivation never yet removed the underlying cause of the desire for alcohol, no matter how long a period this deprivation may have extended, nor has it ever removed the desire itself. These things can be brought about only by the elimination of the poison from the victim's system. All alcoholics, no matter whether they are preferred risks or hopeless cases, whether they are to be returned to society or isolated and sterilized, should be unpoisoned. Success of the specific treatment. The first exhaustive test of this treatment for alcoholism was made at Bellevue Hospital, and its results were announced in a pamphlet published by Dr. Alexander Lambert. The hospital in which the work was carried on was without ideal facilities. Overcrowded wards and an insufficiency of nurses were among the many handicaps. That the results were more hopeful than anything theretofore accomplished is indicated by the following extracts from articles by Dr. Lambert. Results. I am often asked to the success of this treatment and the percentage of patients who remain free from their addiction. This varies enormously with the individual patients, and one can only judge from one's experience. My personal experience is that 11% of the morphinists and 12% of the alcoholics return for treatment. Doubling this percentage, it still gives us 75% as remaining free from addiction. Of these, a very high percentage are known to have stayed free. Scope of the treatment. This treatment is not offered as a cure of morphinism or as a cure of delirium tremens or chronic alcoholism, as I said in the first article. It will, however, obliterate the terrible craving that these patients suffer when, unaided, they endeavour to get off their drugs, or are made to go through the slow withdrawal without some medication to ease them. Compared with the old methods of either slow withdrawal or rapid withdrawal, it is infinitely superior. Deprivation of a drug is in no way equivalent to elimination of the drug from the body. Deprivation causes suffering, elimination relieves it. But neither this combination of drugs nor any other combination known to man can prevent persons, after they are free from their addiction, be it alcohol or morphine, from going out and re-poisoning themselves by taking again the drug which has poisoned them and led them on to their habitual intoxication. There are many more morphinists who have unconsciously fallen under the spell of the habit through no fault of their own than can be said of alcoholics. To anyone who has ever tried to break off a patient by the old withdrawal methods when they were taking goodly amounts of the drug, and has struggled to keep them free from it after they have ceased taking it, the difference in the picture when undergoing the treatment by this new method is most striking. With this treatment, most patients do not suffer more than a bearable amount of discomfort of hot flashes, slight pains, and the discomfort of their cathartics. When properly administered, this is the full extent of suffering with the majority of patients. Some do not go as far as this, a few suffer more. But when improperly administered, they can suffer as much by this method as by any other. No test more exacting than the one made at Bellevue Hospital could be devised. Most of the cases appearing for treatment in the wards of that institution are of the most advanced type, for the nature of the New York hospital system may be said in a general way to select for Bellevue the least hopeful patients coming from the least hopeful classes of society. If, therefore, anything approaching permanent relief was secured for as many as 20 out of every 100 cases, an extraordinary efficiency was indicated. Of course, the intelligent reader will understand that no man with reason can claim for any treatment the power permanently to divorce from alcohol a man who does not wish to be divorced from it. To take a man whose system has reached that degree of craving for alcohol that he would sign away his right to salvation in exchange for a drink after a brief period of deprivation, if he could not otherwise obtain the alcohol, and to unpoison him so that he feels no necessity or even the slightest desire for a drink or for any stimulant, is to accomplish a great deal of good. It means that his nervous system has been restored to something nearly normal, and that he has been given a chance. The man who has not had this help from outside can do nothing for himself. But having been cleared of the alcoholic poison, he is brought into a mental state wherein he finds it possible to estimate reasonably the harm which alcohol has done him. The patient is then in a mental state that enables his relatives and friends to deal with him without being forced to estimate and allow for alcoholic abnormalities in his process of thought. He is in a physical state that, although it apparently may be worse than that in which the alcohol had placed him, is nevertheless one that will enable his physician to work with him intelligently. Such an achievement seems a perfect piece of medical work of its kind. Properly carried out, my treatment will accomplish exactly this in every instance. It will accomplish it within 5 days, and very likely within 3 days. I have never known it to require a period of more than 7. When this treatment is properly provided for throughout the country, it will be found that neither large nor costly institutions will be necessary. The stay of every patient is so brief that in the average community a small institution containing only a few beds will be found sufficiently large to meet all local needs. The habitual drunkard is not a criminal. Legislation restrictive of the sale and use of habit-forming drugs is in reality a dangerous experiment until other legislation that provides for the medical help of those who would thus be deprived has first been written upon our statute books. I am inclined to think that many of the failures which strew the paths of experimentalists in anti-alcohol movements have been due to a lack of similar foresight. The man who is penalized for drunkenness will usually get drunk again the moment he finds himself at liberty to do so. And this will not be due to any natural depravity upon his part, but rather to an almost inevitable result of the bodily craving that thrills his every fibre, and for the relief of which nothing whatever has been provided. We shall never make any serious progress in dealing with the most serious evils of alcoholism until we waken to the folly of treating the hard and habitual drinker as a criminal, exacting from him penalties and inflicting upon him disgrace. In every instance, the passage of restrictive legislation should be accompanied by the passage of remedial legislation, for provision for the relief of suffering caused by prohibitory laws must be provided. The courts should carefully consider the facilities at the disposition of the communities in which they labour, and in imposing sentences they should be careful not to overtax them. It would be better for a community to keep a victim upon a steady diet of alcohol for weeks while he was waiting for a bed in a curative institution, than to risk causing the man's death or insanity by depriving him of his alcohol until the means for relieving his system's acute demand for it were at hand. By following a similar plan, it will be found that the evil of habit-forming drugs can be exterminated in the United States. Whether alcoholism, which is a social vice, ever can be similarly exterminated by like methods I do not know, but I am convinced that an intelligent pursuit of such a policy would do more to accomplish the desired results than ever has been done by other means. How society treats the victim of alcohol. The care of the inebriate, who already comes under the law, and who, by his habit, forces his way into the state and municipal hospitals, forms one of the great burdens upon society of the present day. It should be regarded as one of the most important problems of modern medicine. No other class of the sick includes so great a number of individual cases. We find, for example, the almost incredible fact staring us in the face that more than 1/3 of all the patients admitted to Bellevue Hospital in New York City are sent there by alcohol, while no less than 2% are sent there by habit-forming drugs. I am casting no reflection upon this or any other institution when I say that there and elsewhere little understanding is shown in dealing with these cases. As a matter of fact, no intelligence is anywhere shown in this matter. The policeman who finds a drunken man or woman on his beat arrests the unfortunate with as much wrath and probably as much brutality as he would show a burglar or a murderer. The committing magistrate before whom the victim is taken treats him or her precisely as he would treat a criminal. In the various penal institutions to which this man or woman is committed, The idea upon which their whole treatment is based is that of punishment. It seems to me that the imperfections of this system might most easily be corrected by the committing magistrates. It is the largest problem which confronts these officials. Therefore, they might very well afford the time necessary to study it carefully. Concerted action by this group of the judiciary might accomplish worthy results almost immediately. As matters are at present organized, the committing magistrate may do any one of four things with an inebriate who has been brought before him. He can release him without penalty, he can put him on probation, he can fine him, he can imprison him. I have yet to discover any one capable of telling me why measures of this sort can possibly be expected to have a beneficial effect upon a person who, through overindulgence, has set up in his system a demand for alcohol. I have no wish to appear publicly as the critic of our petit judiciary, but no class of men is less informed upon this subject, the one subject upon which they should be best informed, than the committing magistrates not only of the United States but of every other country in the world. A year or two ago I made a somewhat comprehensive European tour, and studied carefully the methods of dealing with inebriety. Nowhere did I find the faintest indication of a tendency for real intelligence in regard to the matter. We insist upon special education for the professors of our colleges, yet the influence of a committing magistrate upon the human life that is brought under his direct sphere of influence may be greater even than that of a college professor or a college student. And of our committing magistrate we make no educational demand whatsoever, and have never established even a minimum standard of intelligent information for our petite bench. It is my belief that expert sociological knowledge should be required of every man considered for the important post of committing magistrate. Responsibility of the magistrate. The fact that in New York State a colony for inebriates has been established by law makes this special knowledge more necessary there than it was before. Wherever such institutions have been founded and the courts may contribute to their population by commitment, an unintelligent magistrate finds it within his power, not rarely, but every day, to do more harm during one session of his court than he is likely to find it within the scope of his intelligence to do good during the course of a year's sitting. I find it impossible to be otherwise than bitterly pessimistic in regard to the work our courts are doing with alcoholics. Under the New York law, a man taken for the first time before a magistrate and charged with alcoholism must either be fined or told that if he again appears charged with that offence, he will be subject to commitment to the inebriate farm for a period of not less than 3 months. By this procedure, not one thing has been accomplished towards the salvation of the man. If he is not committed, but is only threatened and ordered to report weekly or oftener to the probation officer or the court itself, the greatest of all damage has been done, since the man's pride has been depreciated. After definite medical treatment has been administered to an inebriate, the only other thing that can be done is to make an intelligent appeal to his pride. In this appeal is included at least one half the possibilities of his salvation. Nowhere, save in a few instances in New York City, is the alcoholic case treated with medical intelligence, and nowhere in the world is the balance of the necessary treatment, the right appeal to pride, carried out with any degree of common sense. I find one system of special horror in this treatment of inebriates: committing a man for 3 months, then for 6, and then for 12. No more certain means could be devised to increase the harm done by alcohol to the community. Not only does this course fail to help the man in any measure whatsoever, but it increases the unspeakable harm which his misfortune must inflict upon his family. In most instances, such a commitment not only means the man's separation from his means of livelihood for the period of its duration, but his disgrace from it as the result of this utterly inefficient and legally inflicted disgrace. The whole effort of society in dealing with the alcoholic should be to prevent those things which at present are the very ones which it accomplishes: mental depression, loss of pride, disgrace, and loss of social position. I am inclined to think that as the world grows older it will be more and more convinced of the inefficiency of punishment, and more aware of the necessity of reform through helpfulness. It seems obvious that penalization, probationary influences, or colonization must be utterly useless in removing from a man's physical system the craving for alcohol. Therefore it is equally obvious that their only successful mission must be to remove the victim of drink from contact with society for the length of time during which his sentence is operative. The man who is in all probability incurable is not put permanently out of harm's way by these means, or placed where he can do no harm. The man who has good stuff in him, but who has, through chance, used drugs to excess upon one or more occasions, is offered by these methods nothing in the nature of a fair show toward regaining his usefulness. I see the possibility of many serious results in New York's Board of Inebriety plan. These, I think, have their beginning principally in the fact that nothing along the line of classification has been devised, or, as far as I know, has been even suggested. If its work were made efficiently by means of the adoption of a plan of classification, this board really might become a great boon to society. Suppose that instead of penalizing the man who has been taken before it for inebriety, the board, after intelligent and detailed investigation, has shown that the man is probably curable, should provide for him the necessary definite medical treatment to relieve his system from the ill effects of alcohol, and then should bring him into contact with physiological and analytical minds capable of enforcing upon him a realization of the terrible meaning of alcoholism. Without having affected the man's pride, it would send him back to his family and his task with a cool brain and a new point of view. Would not this be a vastly better way of dealing with him than those which are at present followed? There is no reason why some small charge should not be enforced against such beneficiaries of an enlightened public intelligence who might be found able to meet it. This would accomplish two things: it would reduce the public expense of the system, and it would add very greatly to the mental impression left upon the mind of the person for whose benefit the state was working. Furthermore, if a magistrate had once formed the habit of feeling personal interest in individual cases, probably his first act after a man had appeared before him would be to send for the accused employer and make the truth of the situation clear to him. The mere fact that a man has once been intoxicated should not justify his discharge from employment, in which, at normal times, he is useful and efficient. Both for his sake and for his employer's, efforts should be made towards reform, for it is not infrequently the case that the man who has lost control through drink is in normal conditions the best man in the office, factory, or workshop. That is one of the chief tragedies of the problem of alcohol. There is no subject upon which society more sadly needs enlightenment. In this educational process it is probable that the magistrate will be the largest factor. He must realize that he is not society's instrument of vengeance, but society's instrument of helpfulness. It should be his aim not to punish, but to protect and preserve. He must realize that scientific knowledge of the problems which confront him is as necessary to his real efficiency as scientific knowledge is to the analytical chemist. The heart of a conscientious magistrate should thrill with a special sympathy, should be aware of a great responsibility whenever there appears for judgment in his court a man who for the first time has lost control of himself through drink. To mar this man forever is an easy task. To make him may be difficult, but it is certainly not beyond the bounds of possibility. The hard drinker, who for the first time is haled into court as the consequence of his intoxication, never is willing to concede either to himself or to others that he needs help. His soul revolts before the mere thought that he has more than temporarily, even momentarily, lost control. He is likely to deny that he has developed a craving for alcohol, and emphatically and indignantly to assert that his drunkenness has been merely incidental to the social spirit, an accident, and in general a thing of no primary importance. The thought that without help there is even a possibility that he may drift from bad to worse is abhorrent to him, and is indignantly repudiated. He will cheerfully admit that many other men of his acquaintance have fallen victims to the effects of alcohol, but he will vehemently deny the possibility of a similar fall on his own part. The magistrate who thoroughly understands all the details of the alcoholic's physiology, and who is sufficiently adroit of mind and speech to take advantage of this understanding, giving the culprit who has been brought before him every benefit of a carefully and intelligently organized knowledge of alcoholism, could not fail to be one of the most useful of society's servants and safeguards. The man or woman taken before a magistrate as the result of alcoholic overindulgence offers a peculiarly perplexing problem. Society has placed itself in a highly inconsistent position as regards its relation to alcohol. It permits a man to pay it for the privilege to sell alcohol to anyone who asks for it, the only restriction being that he may not sell it to a person who already has had too much. This leaves the decision as to a customer's needs and capacity, as well as perils, to be rendered by the man behind the bar. Thus, to an extent, we entrust daily the destinies of an appreciable portion of our public to a class of men who certainly have done little to earn general confidence. In nearly every state, if not in all, laws exist imposing penalties upon the dealer in alcohol who sells drink to a person who is already in a state of intoxication. But a careful study of the records of our courts would fail to reveal any large number of liquor dealers who have been charged with this offence, while it is obvious that most persons found upon the public streets or elsewhere in a state of intoxication must have had alcohol served to them at a time when they already had enough. As a matter of fact, the intelligent mind cannot fail to realize that the man who has had enough invariably has had too much. This is only one of the many reflections which must occur to the inquiring mind occupying itself with this problem. We have made innumerable laws dealing with and fondly supposed to control the sale of alcoholic beverages, but as a matter of fact only one sort of law has ever been devised which possibly could control it, and that law provides for absolute prohibition. The need of an organized effort to help the alcoholic. If the world wishes to be relieved in any measure from the human waste attributable to alcohol, the time must speedily arrive when municipalities will recognize it as their duty to provide definite medical help for every man who wishes to be freed from the craving for alcohol, and who cannot afford to pay for treatment. It must be recognized that it is society's duty to hold out this helping hand to every man who has a job and is in danger of losing it through the trap which society itself has set for his feet by authorizing and thereby encouraging the sale of alcoholic intoxicants. Notwithstanding the presence in our social fabric of innumerable charitable bodies, churches, religious societies, and other groups of people who mean well and work hard to aid the unfortunates, it is a fact that nowhere in the United States, or as far as I know, anywhere else, is there a single organization which is effectually working along definite and intelligent lines for the preservation of the endangered man who is still curable. No mother, wife, employer, or magistrate can effectively reason with a man whose brain is befogged by alcohol, for that man cannot reason with himself. Tears, threats of imprisonment, and loss of position do not have upon him their normal reaction. He is a sick man whose mental and physical condition is abnormal. It must be made normal before anything real can be done toward his assistance. There is but one way out of the sad muddle in which alcohol has plunged certain branches of our judiciary. In every city must be established emergency hospital wards to which committing magistrates may send persons with excessive alcoholic or drug histories. Treatment in these emergency wards will be neither difficult nor costly. Once this has been done, the patient may be returned to court, where his clarified brain will greatly assist the magistrate in deciding upon the proper course for his assistance and the protection of society. The commitment of the alcoholic to an ordinary penal institution is a perilous expedient. The experiences which various authorities connected with the Department of Correction in the City of New York have had with the drug and alcohol smugglers indicate a condition that exists more or less generally in penal institutions throughout the country. The drug user or alcoholic who has been locked up in a prison is in no way relieved of his craving for the substance which is harming him, and his efforts to obtain it will be desperate. The class of men who surround him as prison guards is not of high type. If he has money, they will get it from him if they can, and if he has friends outside, especially if they themselves be drug or liquor addicts, will attempt to smuggle to him what he craves, inasmuch as it is much easier to smuggle drugs into a prison than it is alcohol. Many alcoholics have been changed in prison to drug takers, and after this change the metamorphosis for the mere drunkard into an actual criminal has often occurred. The administration of a definite medical treatment should therefore be regarded as imperative in all cases of drug addiction, and in most cases of alcoholic addiction that appear in our prisons. In the cases of alcoholic addictions, imprisonment should end, in the case of first offenders, with the completion of the treatment and the restoration of the subject's mind to normal. I cannot too strongly or too frequently reiterate the statement that there is no more desperate illness than chronic alcoholism. Purification from the physical demand for alcohol at the place of commitment of men taken before the courts upon the charge of intoxication might save the public from a greater burden than any other available medical process. Drunkenness cannot rightfully be considered as a crime as long as society sanctions the sale of alcohol and profits by it. Therefore the punishment of alcoholics as criminals is an intolerable injustice. That it is also an economic waste is as clearly apparent. End of section 7. That Handicap by Charles B. Towns. Chapter 8. The Injuriousness of Tobacco. When tobacco was first introduced into Europe, the use of it was everywhere regarded as an injurious habit, and on this account for a while it made slow progress. It is no less injurious now than it ever was. We have simply grown used to it, and it was only when people became used to its injuriousness that the habit began to make great strides. We find nowadays that smokers, as well as non-smokers, are suspicious of any form of tobacco taking to which they have not become used. Smokers who for the first time meet chewers or snuffers, or those who dip tobacco as in the South, are affected unpleasantly. Smokers keep on finding chewers disgusting, and smokers of pipes and cigars frequently object to the odor of cigarettes. Nothing more strikingly illustrates how addicted people may become to a habit than the smoking and chewing of the traditional Southern gentlemen of the old school, whom any other personal uncleanliness would have horrified. Young men, most fastidious about their apparel, seem quite unaware that it is saturated with the smell of tobacco. The odor of a cigarette is probably as offensive to some of those who do not smoke as any other smell under heaven. Yet such is the power of habit that we tolerate all these things. If we could begin all over again, we should find the same general objection to smoking that existed in Europe when the habit first began. Our chief need, then, is a new mind on the subject. How can we get it? The circumstance of my giving up smoking 18 years ago may have some slight significance in this connection. I was smoking hard, and began to have a vague feeling that it was hurting me. I had been playing whist at a late hour in my room at a hotel, and when I finally went to bed I could not sleep for a long while. I awoke with a bad taste and a parched mouth, in a room heavy with stale smoke and unsightly with cigar butts lying everywhere. Suddenly a disgust for the whole habit seized me, and I broke off at once and completely. After a week or so, when the first feeling of seediness and uneasiness and depression had worn away, I found my appetite and concentration and initiative increasing. You will observe that it was not until I began to regard smoking as harmful that I saw it was also filthy. I had a new mind on the subject. I am trying to give my readers a new mind on the subject, and if they had not come to suspect the evil of smoking, they will naturally ask me to prove that it is harmful. Does it do anyone any physical good? Arguments in favor of tobacco for any physical reason are baseless. It does not aid digestion, preserve the teeth, or disinfect, and it is not a remedy for anything. The good it does, and no habit can become general, of course, unless it does apparent good, can only be mental. Let me admit at once that smoking confers mental satisfaction. It seems to give one companionship when one has none, something to do when one is bored, keeps one from feeling hungry when one is hungry, and blunts the edge of hardship and worry. This sums up the agreeable results of tobacco. There are one or two more specialized agreeable results which I can exclude at this moment, because they are only temporary. The results I mention, let me admit at once, are real, and both immediate and apparent. On the other hand, the injurious results, after one has become inured to tobacco poison, are both unapparent and delayed. The physiological action of tobacco. As to the physiological and toxic effects of tobacco, there is much difference of opinion. Everybody knows that the first chew or the first smoke is apt to create nausea, and that no matter how long a man has been smoking, a little lump of the tar which has collected in his pipe will sicken him. Nicotine is in itself highly toxic, but is very volatile, and is absorbed only from the portion of the cigar or cigarette held in the mouth. The products of combustion of tobacco are chemical substances which are also toxic, and nausea naturally stops the smoker before symptoms of acute poisoning result. One must look then for symptoms of slow poisoning. The popular belief that tobacco stunts growth is supported by the fact that non-smokers, observed for 4 years at Yale and Amherst, increased more in weight, height, chest girth, and lung capacity than smokers did in the same period. Every athlete knows that it hurts the wind, that is, injures the ability of the heart to respond quickly to extra work. It also affects the precision of eye and hand. A great billiard player who does not smoke once assured me that he felt sure of winning when his opponent was a smoker. A tennis player began to smoke at the age of 21, and found that men whom he had beaten before with ease could now beat him. Sharpshooters and riflemen know that their shooting is more accurate when they do not smoke. But you may say, the athletes and billiard players and the rest are experts. I am an average man, making average use of my faculties. Besides, I am not contending that excessive smoking isn't injurious, and I will even concede that the limit of excess varies with the man. But is it not true that harmful results of average smoking for the average man are rare? In answer, let me on my side admit that they are, the apparent harmful results. We are, however, very ignorant of the effect of small, continued doses of the various tobacco poisons. All drugs, comparatively harmless, such as lead, mercury, and arsenic, produce a highly injurious effect when taken in repeated small doses. Just what effect the use of tobacco engenders we cannot absolutely know, but no physician doubts that smoking may be a factor in almost any disease from which his patient is suffering. There can be, for instance, no question that smoke, simply as smoke, irritates the mucous membrane of the bronchial tubes and renders them more susceptible to infections. By irritating the mucous membrane of the nose and throat, it tends to produce catarrh, and therefore catarrhal deafness. It would therefore seem fair to state that the man who does not use tobacco is less susceptible to disease and contagion, and recovers more quickly from a serious illness or operation. From this we should expect to find that tobacco shows most in later life, when vitality is ebbing and the machinery of the body is beginning to wear. It is in the middle age that a man begins to feel the harm. In short, though we know only the precise or immediate effect of nicotine, and only some of the morbid processes which excessive smoking may produce, it is likely that the worst aspect of tobacco is something that we do not know very much about: its tendency to reduce a man's general vigour. The dominant characteristic of tobacco is the fact that it heightens blood pressure. The irritant action by which it does this sometimes leads to still more harmful results. Its second action is narcotic. It lessens the connection between the nerve centres and the outside world. These two actions account for all the good and all the bad effects of tobacco. As a narcotic, it temporarily abolishes anxiety and discomfort by making the smoker care less about what is happening to him. But it is a well-known law of medicine that all the drugs which in the beginning lessens nerve action increases it in the end. Thus, smoking finally causes apprehension, hyperexcitability, and muscular unrest. Here this inevitable law seems to give contradictory results. Every physician knows that an enormous amount of insomnia is relieved by smoking, even if it is at the expense of laziness the next day. At the same time, every physician knows that most excessive smokers are troubled with insomnia. Cigarettes. In using tobacco, we take the poison into the tissues. The chewer and the snuffer get the effect through the tissue with which the tobacco comes in contact. The cigarette smoker almost invariably inhales, and he gets the most harm merely because the bronchial mucous membranes absorb the poison most rapidly. The tobacco itself is no more harmful than it is in a pipe or cigar. Indeed, it is often less so in the cheaper grades, for being less pure it contains less nicotine. Furthermore, the tobacco is generally drier in a cigarette, and for that reason the combustion is better, for the products of combustion of dry and damp tobacco are not the same. But since it is a little difficult to inhale a pipe or cigar without choking, the smoke products of a pipe or cigar are usually absorbed only by the mouth, nose, and throat, whereas the inhaled smoke of the cigarette is absorbed by the entire area of windpipe and bronchial tubes. If you wish to see how much poison you inhale, try the old experiment of puffing cigarette smoke through a handkerchief, and then, having inhaled the same amount of smoke, blow it out again through another portion of the same handkerchief. The difference in the discoloration will be found to be very marked. You will note that in the second case there is hardly any stain on the handkerchief. The stain is on your windpipe and bronchial tubes. If a man inhales a pipe or cigar, he gets more injury simply because he gets stronger tobacco. But a man never inhales a pipe or a cigar unless he is a smoker of long standing, or unless he has begun with cigarettes. Besides allowing one to inhale, a cigarette engenders more muscular unrest than any other kind of smoke. Because of its shortness, cheapness, and convenience, one lights a cigarette, throws it away, and then lights another. This spasmodic process, constantly repeated, increases the smoker's restlessness, while at the same time satisfying it with a feeling that he is doing something. Yet, despite the fact that cigarette smoking is the worst form of tobacco addiction, virtually all boys who smoke start with cigarettes. It is generally believed that in the immature, the moderate use of tobacco stunts the normal growth of the body and mind, and causes various nervous disturbances, especially of the heart, disturbances which it causes in later life only when smoking has become excessive. That is to say, though a boy's stomach grows tolerant of nicotine to the extent of taking it without protest, the rest of the body keeps on protesting. Furthermore, many businessmen will tell you that tobacco damages a boy's usefulness in his work. This is necessarily so, since anything which lowers vitality creates some kind of incompetence. For the same reason, the boy who smokes excessively not only is unable to work vigorously, but he does not wish to work at all. This result, apparent during growth, is only less apparent after growth, when other causes may step in to neutralize it. Tobacco, in bringing about a depreciation of the nerve cells, brings, together with physical results like insomnia, lowered vitality and restlessness, their moral counterparts like irritability, lack of concentration, desire to avoid responsibility, and to travel the road of least resistance. If there were some instrument to determine it, in my opinion there would be seen a difference of 15% in the general efficiency of smokers and non-smokers. The time is already at hand when smokers will be barred out of positions which demand quick thought and action. Already tobacco is forbidden during working hours in the United States Steel Corporation. Many men were prejudiced against smoking until they went to college. There they found themselves out of it because they did not smoke. More than that, they found that the smoke of social gatherings irritated their eyes and throat, and they thought that smoking might keep them from finding other people's smoke annoying. A man who had left off smoking told me that at the first smoker he attended, afterwards he found the air offensive, and his eyes smarting intolerably, although when he had been helping to create the clouds in which they were sitting, he had not noticed it at all. These two experiences are common. For this reason, the social inducements to smoking are considerably greater than those to drinking. The man who refuses to drink may feel as much out of it as the man who refuses to smoke, but he has ordinarily, and in the presence of gentlemen, no other penalty to pay. He undergoes no discomfort in spending the evening in a roomful of drinkers, and he can manage to find things to drink that will have for them the semblance of good fellowship. It is the social features that attend the acquiring and the leaving off the habit which make smoking difficult to attack. In its present state, even if a boy were thoroughly familiarized in school with the harm tobacco would do him, he would still be seduced by the social side of it. When a habit fosters or traditionally accompanies social intercourse, it is harder to uproot. What grounded opiums so strongly in China was its social side. The Chinese lacked social occupation, and it was not the custom of the country for a man to find it with his friends and family, though no people are more socially inclined. Smoking opium became their chief social activity. They gathered together in the one heated room of the house to gossip over their pipes. We smoke tobacco as the Chinese smoke opium, for company and in company. Thus one must provide strong reasons to make a man give it up. He will not do so because it cost him something. He expects to pay for his pleasures. When a man has actually gone to pieces, it is comparatively easy to convince him that he ought to give up what is hurting him. But the average man has not been excessive enough for that, and has never brought himself to the point of serious conscious injury. Even a physician cannot with any certainty tell the average moderate smoker whether tobacco is hurting him. Consequently, if one would make this man stop smoking, especially when he sees that leaving off has caused some people more apparent discomfort than all their smoking did, one's only chance is to make him change his mental attitude. I hope to assist in doing this by calling attention to the fact that tobacco not only prepares the way for physical diseases of all kinds, as any physician will tell you, but also, as long investigation has shown me, for alcoholism and for drug taking. Tobacco, alcohol, and opium. The relation of tobacco, especially in the form of cigarettes, and alcohol and opium is a very close one. For years I have been dealing with alcoholism and morphinism, have gone into their every phase and aspect, have kept careful and minute details between 6,000 and 7,000 cases, and I have never seen a case, except occasionally with women, which did not have a history of excessive tobacco. It is true that my observations are restricted to cases which need medical help, the neurotic temperaments, but I am prepared to say that for the phlegmatic man, for the man temperamentally moderate, for the outdoor labourer, whose physical exercise tends to counteract the effects of the tobacco and the alcohol he uses, in short, for all men, tobacco is an unfavourable factor which predisposes to worse habits. A boy always starts smoking before he starts drinking. If he is disposed to drink, that disposition will be increased by smoking, because the action of tobacco makes it normal for him to feel the need of stimulation. He is likely to go to alcohol to soothe the muscular unrest, to blunt the irritation he has received from tobacco. From alcohol he goes to morphine for the same reason. The nervous condition due to excessive drinking is allayed by morphine, just as the nervous condition due to excessive smoking is allayed by alcohol. Morphine is the legitimate consequence of alcohol, and alcohol is the legitimate consequence of tobacco. Cigarettes, drink, opium is the logical and regular series. The man predisposed to alcohol by the inheritance of a nervous temperament will, if he uses tobacco at all, almost invariably use it to excess. And this excess creates a restlessness for which alcohol is the natural antidote. The experience of any type of man is that if he takes a drink when he feels he has smoked too much, he finds he can at once begin smoking all over again. For that reason the two go together, and the neurotic type of man too often combines the two. Tobacco thus develops the necessity for alcohol. It is very significant that in dealing with alcoholism, no real reform can be expected if the patient does not give up tobacco. Again, most men who have ever used alcohol to excess, if restricted voluntarily or involuntarily, will use tobacco to excess. This excess in tobacco produces a narcotic effect which temporarily blunts the craving for alcohol. Another way of saying the same thing is that when smokers are drunk, they no longer care to smoke, a fact that is a matter of common observation. This means that there is a nervous condition produced alike by alcohol and tobacco. When a man gets it from drinking, he does not keep on trying to get it from smoking. As well as reacting upon each other, the two habits keep each other going. It is not altogether by haphazard association that saloons also sell cigars. They sell them for the same reason that they give away pretzels, to make a man buy more drinks. This relationship between tobacco and alcoholism is not understood by the public. It has been absolutely demonstrated that the continued use of tobacco is a tremendous handicap upon the man who is endeavoring to free himself from the habit of alcoholic indulgence. Only a man of the strongest character will persist in abstaining from alcohol unless he also abstains from tobacco, even after he has undergone the most intelligent medical treatment. In the system of a man already disposed towards alcoholic stimulation, no one thing will prove so positive a factor toward creating the sense of need as the use of tobacco. Physiological action of tobacco is to create muscular, motor unrest. Most habitual smokers consume every day more than enough tobacco to carry them far beyond the point where its stimulating effect ends and its narcotic effect begins. Where this habitually occurs, the definitely toxic effect is notable, and this results in a demand for that stimulation which the tobacco itself once furnished, but now does not. Here is an evil effect of tobacco that is rarely understood and almost never admitted. Opium and cigarettes in China. Current history affords us a striking proof of the closeness of the relation between tobacco and opium. I have spent a good deal of time in the Orient in the interest of those who were trying to subdue the opium evil, and I may add that there is in China today a flourishing American tobacco concern which has grown rich out of the sale of cigarettes. With the extremely cheap Chinese labor, the concern was able to sell 20 cigarettes for a cent of our money. Up to the beginning of this enterprise, about 1900, the Chinese had never used tobacco except in pipes, and in very minute quantities in rolling their own crude cigarettes. The concern was sending salesmen and demonstrators through the country to show the people how to smoke cigarettes. Now it is estimated that 1/2 of the cigarette consumption of the world is in China. In trying to lessen the opium evil, in which they have to a considerable extent succeeded, The Chinese are merely substituting the cigarette evil. It is well known to the confirmed opium smoker that he needs less opium if he smokes cigarettes. The Chinese today are spending twice as much money for tobacco as for opium. I once said to a Chinese public man, "I can help you get rid of the opium habit because you have found that you must get rid of it, but I cannot help you to get rid of the evil you are substituting for it, for not even America has yet found out that she must get rid of it. Your cure, I fear, is worse than your disease, and our disease has no cure until we change our mental attitude." If anyone thinks that China is the gainer by substituting the one drug habit for the other, I beg leave to differ with him. The opium smoker smokes in private with other smokers, and is thus not offensive to other people. He is not injuring non-smokers, or arousing the curiosity of boys, or polluting the atmosphere, or creating a craving in others. In the West, the opium habit is generally condemned because the West is able to look with a new and unbiased mind on a drug habit that is not its own. I consider that cigarette smoking is the greatest vice devastating humanity today, because it is doing more than any other vice to deteriorate the race. Like action of the three habits. The more you compare smoking and drinking and drugging, the more resemblances you see. Opium, like tobacco and alcohol, ceases to stimulate the moment the effect of it is felt. It then becomes a narcotic. The history of the three as a resort in emergency is precisely the same. At the time when the average man feels that he needs his faculties most, he will, if addicted to any of the three, deliberately seek stimulation from it. He does not intend to go on long enough to get the narcotic effect, since that would be clearly defeating his own aims. He means to stop with the stimulant and sedative effect, but that he is unable to do. The inhaler of tobacco gets his effect in precisely the same way that the opium smoker gets his, the rapid absorption by the tissues of the bronchial tubes. It may be news to the average man to hear that the man who smokes opium moderately suffers no more physical deterioration than the man who inhales tobacco moderately. The excessive smoker of cigarettes experiences the same mental and physical disturbance when deprived of them that the opium smoker experiences when deprived of opium. The medical treatment necessary to bring about a physiological change in order to destroy the craving is the same. The effect of giving up the habit is the same: cessation of similar physical and nervous and mental disturbances, gain in bodily weight and energy, and a desire for physical exercise. A like comparison, item for item, may be made with alcohol, but it is the similarity with opium which I wish particularly to emphasize here. Tobacco and moral sensitiveness. Morphine, as is very well known, will distort the moral sense of the best person on earth. It is part of the action of the drug. Since the way morphine gets its narcotic effect is very similar to the way tobacco gets its effect, one would naturally suppose that tobacco would produce, in a milder degree, something of the same moral distortion. This may seem a startling conclusion, but change your mental attitude and observe. Have not smokers undergone a noticeable moral deterioration in at least one particular? They have a callous indifference to the rights of others. This happens with all habitual indulgences, of course, but is it not carried more generally to an extreme with tobacco than with anything else? Few men quarrel with a hostess who does not offer them drinks, but all habitual smokers expect that, regardless of their own desires, she will let them smoke after dinner. "We gave up the fight against tobacco in our drawing rooms long ago," said a famous London hostess. "We found it was a case of no smoke, no men." Respectable men in New York City, who would not dream of deliberately breaking any other law, carry cigars and cigarettes into the subway, despite the fact that it is forbidden, and that it is vitally necessary to keep the air there as pure as possible. A gentleman is more annoyed at being forced to consult another's preference about not smoking than about anything else that could arise in social intercourse, and is often at small pains to conceal his impatience with old-fashioned people who believe they have rights which should be respected. On all sides the attitude seems to be, what right has anyone to object to my smoking? The matter is really on the opposite basis. What right has anyone to smoke when other people object to it? If a man must get drunk, we say he shall get drunk where he is a nuisance only to himself and to others of the same mind. If a man feels the need of interlarding his conversation with obscenity and grossness, we say he may not compel us to listen to him. But a smoker may with impunity pollute the air, offend the nostrils, and generally make himself a nuisance to everybody in his neighbourhood who does not practice his particular vice. Is this not a kind of moral obtuseness? Change your mental attitude and consider. The action of a narcotic produces a peculiar cunning and resource in concealment. It develops, when occasion arises, the desire to deceive, and whether occasion arises or not, the desire to shift obligation and evade direct responsibility. Tobacco does this more mildly than opium, and it does so more appreciably with boys than with men. But as with opium, it is part of the narcotic effect in all cases. Let it always be remembered that if a man smokes and inhales tobacco excessively, he is narcotizing himself more than when he smokes opium moderately. End of chapter 8.
Habits That Handicap by Charles B. Towns. Chapter 9. Tobacco and the Future of the Race. Never yet has tobacco done any good to a man. Its direct effect has been harmful to millions, and indirectly it has harmed many other millions by setting up a systematic demand for stimulants. Of all the widely used products of nature, tobacco finds the least excuse in real necessity. Virtually the only medical use to which the active principle of tobacco, nicotine, can be put is the production of nausea, and there are many other drugs that can be used with much better effect for that purpose. If one will study the pharmacopoeia, he will find that, next to prussic acid, nicotine is rated as the most powerful known poison, and is not credited with a single curative property. From a medical point of view, it is valueless. The social standing of the man who took it from the teepees of the North American Indians to England is mainly responsible for its taking root there, for the acquisition of the tobacco habit is a painful process. Nature's revolt against it is much more instinctive than her revolt against alcohol. Furthermore, like any other form of poison, its effects are most immediate and evident upon the young and weak, for they are easier to poison than the mature and strong. The full effect of the tobacco habit is not yet apparent. To one who has made a careful study of the effects of tobacco, the prospect for the future is not encouraging. The habit was already widespread before the extensive manufacture, or even knowledge, of cigarettes was introduced into the United States, and this latter form of smoking, which is easily the most obnoxious and harmful of all, has not yet had time to disclose its full power for injury. For it is in the inhaling of tobacco that the smoker receives his greatest injury, and the habit of inhalation is peculiar to the cigarette smoker. While there are smokers of cigars and pipes who inhale their smoke, it will almost always be found upon investigation that they acquired the habit of inhalation through smoking cigarettes. The average man with a cigarette history gets no pleasure out of smoke which he does not inhale. Even if a cigarette is made of the best tobacco, undrugged, and wrapped in the purest of rice paper, the mere fact that the smoke is almost invariably inhaled suffices to make cigarette smoking the most harmful form of the tobacco habit. Inhalation is harmful because it not only exposes the absorbent tissues of the mouth and upper throat to the smoke, but thrusts the smoke throughout the throat, lungs, and nose, all of which are lined with a specially sensitive membrane of great absorptive capacity. Thus from the smoke of the cigarette the system takes up many times as much poison as it takes up from the uninhaled smoke of the pipe or cigar. Indeed, it may be added that the purer and higher the grade of the tobacco, the more harmful it is to the smoker, for the more it will tempt him into inhalation. Another danger of certain brands of cigarettes, principally the costly imported and specially flavored brands, is that to the extraordinary dangers of nicotine poisoning found in all cigarettes are added in these higher grades the perils of their flavoring materials, from which even so dangerous a drug as opium is not always absent. I believe that the evil effects of tobacco will be much more apparent in the next generation than they are in this, for 40 years ago, when I was a boy, the lad who decided to begin to smoke knew nothing of cigarettes, and had only the pipe and the cheap cigar to choose between, forms so overpowering that they frequently discouraged him at the start. Thus many were undoubtedly saved from the tobacco habit. But now, with mild cigarettes upon the market at very low prices, and in most states found on sale in every candy store, the situation has perils undreamed of at that earlier period. It is noteworthy that cigarettes are doped expressly to allay nausea, which is the normal effect of tobacco smoking upon the uninured human system, and at the same time to quiet that motor unrest which is the first symptom to follow the introduction of nicotine into the human system. The narcotic effect of the adulterant drugs is therefore to ease the smoker's first pang, and to make him more quickly the victim of the tobacco habit. The smoker of cigarettes gets his narcotic by precisely the same mechanical process through which the opium smoker gets his. The opium smoker would find it far too long and expensive a process to obtain the desired effect from opium by taking it into his stomach, but by burning a very much smaller quantity of the drug and bringing it into contact with the sensitive absorbent tissues of the throat and nose, he obtains the narcotic effect that his system craves. The use of tobacco destroys moral discipline. I am convinced that the use of cigarettes is responsible for the undoing of 75% of the boys who go wrong. Few boys wait until they are mature and their resistance is at its maximum before they begin the use of tobacco. It would be remarkable if they did wait, for their fathers and their older brothers are constantly blowing smoke into their faces. Even where restrictive laws exist, minors find no difficulty in obtaining cigarettes, so that children of the age that is most easily harmed by the use of tobacco now habitually indulge in its most harmful form. There is another unfortunate effect of the use of tobacco by boys. When they begin to smoke, they do so against the wishes and usually against the orders of their parents. This means broken discipline and deception. The boy who endeavors to conceal the fact that he smokes is started along a path that is even more harmful than tobacco. He has to invent excuses for being absent from home, and to explain away the odor of tobacco that is sure to cling to him. And when a boy begins to lie about these things, he will lie about others. So far as truth goes, the bars are down. Furthermore, he has to spend more money. Unless he is one of those unfortunate youths who are not held to a moderate weekly allowance, too often he will resort to dishonest means to obtain the money to satisfy his newly acquired taste. And that is not all. Boys who spend their time in smoking go where they will find other lads also engaged in the forbidden habit. They find congenial groups in pool rooms where they learn to gamble, and in the back rooms of saloons where they learn to drink. The step from the pool room or the saloon to other gambling places and to drinking places frequented by the unworthy of both sexes is an easy one. Thus the boy whose first wrongdoing was the smoking of cigarettes against the wishes of his parents soon becomes the target for all manner of immoral influences. In these days of advanced sociological study, when the mind of the world is set upon efficiency, it is astonishing that so little attention has been given to the effect of tobacco upon the young. To mankind at the present time nothing in the world is so important as the conservation of the boy. Humanity might well make any sacrifice conceivable in order to keep its boys clean. Keeping boys clean means keeping girls clean, and whatever keeps boys and girls clean purifies humanity as a whole. In other words, the boy is the most important thing in the world, and his cleanliness the most vital issue. Setting aside entirely the deleterious effect of nicotine upon his physical system, Early smoking, which usually means the cigarette, is the most harmful single influence that is at present working against his welfare. We can appreciate the terrific total harm which tobacco does to youth, however, only when we add the psychological harm and the physical harm together. Everything considered, the question is an appalling one. The temptation to use tobacco. It is impossible to blame most boys very severely for yielding to the smoke temptation. Therefore it becomes a difficult matter to blame them for the wrongdoing which tends to follow it. Their error is only in the continuation of a similar error that their fathers have made before them and now tacitly encourage. It is difficult to make any lad believe that he need not be a fool because his father is one. Yet in most cases, to save a boy from the demonstrable ills of tobacco using entails just this course of reasoning. Orators and essayists from the beginning of time have found a stumbling block in preaching to their followers virtues they admire and value, but do not themselves possess. The father who forbids his son to smoke because it is harmful and expensive, while his own person reeks with it, is not likely to impress the lad very vividly with either the force or the honesty of his argument. More than one parent has found himself abashed in such circumstances by a son with logic and intelligence. For such a parent there is only one really honest course, to admit to his son that he himself has been a fool, but that he does not wish his son to follow in his footsteps. The necessity of education concerning the danger of tobacco. There is no question in my mind that this matter of tobacco should be made the basis of a very thorough educational campaign among the youth of the United States. The shocking spread of the tobacco habit among the women of American cities indicates, moreover, need for extending this education to girls as well. If cleanliness of body is next to godliness, then cleanliness of mind is godliness, and cleanliness of mind, real cleanliness, is impossible while ignorance exists. Nothing in education is more generally neglected than the enlightenment of the young, an enlightenment which can come only from the mouths of elders who are themselves clean, as to the deadly nature of alcohol, habit-forming drugs, and tobacco. I should very much dislike to send a young and impressionable son for instruction in any subject to any teacher, male or female, who used cigarettes. Thousands upon thousands of parents in this country feel as I do on this subject. But while they realize the danger which might result from the influence of a teacher who smokes, they utterly neglect the far more dangerous and powerful influence of a father who smokes. To my mind, however, it is essential that parents should seriously consider the personal character of the men to whom they entrust the education of their boys. But the use of tobacco reaches far beyond the home circle and the schools, and even pollutes the atmosphere of the church itself. There are few clergymen in the United States who do not use tobacco, and so a clean father who rears a clean son is under the tragic necessity of urging his attendance at a dirty church, and later on sending him to be a student in a dirty college, for the simple reason that there are no clean ones. Society seems to have been viciously organized for the destruction of the boy, in whom lies its chief hope of preservation and improvement. The boy who keeps clean does so at tremendous odds, to which frequently his father, his school-teacher, and his clergymen are the chief contributors. A dozen times during every day of his life he is subjected to the third degree of temptation, and twice out of 3 times this ordeal is thrust upon him by the very persons who really should do most to safeguard and protect him. And now that society has set its sanction upon the use of tobacco by the women of the nation, he is confronted with the further peril of a mother who smokes. It seems to me that this tobacco question detracts enormously from that very vivid hope we might feel for the rising generation, which is also handicapped with alcohol and drugs. Tobacco addiction more dangerous than drug habit or alcoholism. I have no desire to moralize upon the subject of tobacco. I am not a moralist, but a practical student of cause and effect, urging the elimination of bad causes so that bad effects may be eliminated in turn. A very wide experience in studying the result of the use of narcotics has convinced me that the total harm done by tobacco is greater than that done by alcohol or drugs. Nothing else at the present time is contributing so surely to the degeneration of mankind as tobacco, because, while its damage is less immediately acute than that done by alcohol or habit-forming drugs, it is, aside from its own evil effects, a tremendous contributory factor to the use of both. There is nothing to be said in its favor save that it gives pleasure, and this argument has no more force in the case of tobacco than in the case of opium. Any man who uses tobacco poisons himself, and the very openness and permissibility of the vice serve to make the process of self-poisoning dangerous to the public as well. To sum up, the tobacco habit is useless and harmful to the man who yields to it. It is malodorous and filthy, and therefore an infringement upon the rights and comforts of others. Its relation to alcohol is direct and intimate. When an alcoholic comes to me for treatment, I do not regard my chances of success with him as good unless I can make him see that to abandon smoking is a necessary step in his treatment. My deductions concerning the intimate relationship between the use of tobacco and liquors are the result of years of observation and study. And if it is true that no man whose system is alcoholic is fit to be the father of a child, it is no less true that the habitual smoker is also unworthy to be a guardian of his kind. The alcoholic fiend almost invariably becomes the parent of children provided with defective nervous systems, of children as definitely deformed nervously as they would be physically if born with club feet or hare lips. End of chapter 9.
Anne Boulay. Habits That Handicap by Charles B. Towns. Chapter 10. The Sanatorium. There is no class of patients in the world to whom the physician, and especially the physician who conducts the sanatorium, can offer so good an excuse for long-continued treatment as to those addicted to the use of drugs. It is certain that a person who makes a weekly charge to such patients is rarely honest with them or tries to shorten their stay. Several years ago, I freely and without reservation gave all the details of my treatment to the medical world, and though many institutions have endeavored to install it as a part of their own curative policy, most have failed. The failure may be attributed principally, if not wholly, to the fact that few have also adopted the necessary principle of a fixed charge, without regard to the length of time the patient is under treatment. The weekly charge, with its attendant temptation to keep the patient as long as possible, has invariably defeated all possibilities of success. There is also a class of institutions in which the cure for the drug habit consists in the administration of the drug itself in a disguised form. In such surroundings, a patient will contentedly stay indefinitely, for the chains of his habit bind him to the spot. The very fact that he wishes to stay may be accepted as a proof that he has not been benefited by it. For the man who has been freed from a drug habit desires a normal life in the world. Indeed, only his re-entrance into its turmoil and bustle can set him surely on his feet. The average sanatorium, accustomed to the time-honored and thoroughly established system of making its patients comfortable, in other words, pampering and coddling them, finds it difficult, if not impossible, to conform in every detail to the necessities of a system like mine. Even if the institution is equipped with every possible facility, it is highly probable that the physicians in charge may be mentally unfit for the work. Inured by every detail of their training to methods that make a successful treatment of drugs impossible, they find themselves incapable of changing when confronted by specific cases that demand a radically different treatment. The institutions themselves are equally inadaptable. The sanatorium, it must be remembered, is really a boarding house or hotel, and the business of boarding house or hotel, whether it presents an Epicurean or sanitary bill of fare, or whether its staff is supplemented by trained nurses and physicians or not, remains a boarding house or hotel. Its main province is to keep its paying guests and to make them comfortable. The whole sanatorium situation so far as it relates to the cure of those addicted to the use of drugs and alcohol may be summed up in a few words. The average sanatorium is merely a small colony of drug users. No one can deny that. Now, no man who has been freed from his desire for drugs and no one who is being made uncomfortable by deprivation will remain in such surroundings for any length of time. The natural conclusion is that such institutions are not accomplishing what they have promised to be able to accomplish. The inmates are still drug users. This is not true of American institutions alone. Within a few months, I have had as an 11-day inmate of my own institution a very wealthy man who has made 3 European journeys to find relief from the drug habit, on each journey going the rounds of 6 or 8 celebrated institutions, and taking the treatment of each without result. Successful treatment is brief treatment, and no establishment operating upon a system of weekly charge to patients will make an earnest effort to release these patients as soon as possible. In their desire to make their patients comfortable, and so prolong their stay, their usual quantity of drugs is supplied to them, though of course in some disguised form. There is no other way of accomplishing this. Moreover, so long as a patient is thus kept comfortable, he is unable to describe his symptoms, for he does not feel them. The drug, therefore, hides exactly those details of a man's condition that it is essential for the attending physician to know. In a normal man, the presence of pain is always a guide for a physician, but in a drug case, this is always absent. The constant drugging that conceals the symptoms of organic ailment may permit one of comparative insignificance, at the time a patient entered a sanatorium, to become incurable before he leaves. Thus the result of his stay may mean in the end a serious or even fatal deterioration. And the prolonged stay becomes a means, intentional or unintentional, of mulcting the patient or his friends of money. The sum annually spent in the United States upon useless sanatorium treatment must certainly amount to millions. I have had patients come to me from such institutions, to which they have paid sums as large as $10,000. Wealthy people are especially likely to become victims of this form of rapacity, and a mere glance at some of the receipted bills that I have seen in their possession is enough to stagger a modest financial imagination. The ingenuity with which a sanatorium manager devises extras is worthy of the name genius. And the physically incurable patient is often retained in the sanatorium till his money or the money of his friends is exhausted in a needless sacrifice to greed. The physician's attitude toward the drug user. It is also necessary to direct attention to some of the errors of the general medical practitioner who deals with cases of this sort. It is not unnatural for a doctor to hesitate at the thought of surrendering his patient into strange hands. There may be unselfish as well as purely mercenary reasons for this hesitation. The doctor may hope that he himself can aid the sufferer, and may therefore endeavor to administer this treatment either in the patient's home or possibly in his own residence or private hospital. The patient is likely to be as much inclined to this course as the doctor, for the doctor is his friend and confidant, and he dislikes intensely the idea of revealing what he regards as the shameful secret of his enslaved soul to strangers' ears. Treatment in the doctor's or the patient's own environment must of necessity be an expensive matter, but if the patient can afford it, he is likely to desire it. This is most natural, especially if the patient is one of the tens of thousands who have tried the treatment offered by a sanatorium and found it not only valueless, but horrifying. There are, too, many patients who from sheer lack of funds naturally desire a home administration of the treatment as a means of saving expense. Of course, many of the most worthy cases are to be found among people of moderate or small means. The drug habit is itself impoverishing. Even so, I find myself irresistibly impelled to advise against any attempt to treat such cases in their own environment, or in any environment improvised by a local doctor. This I do only because I have known so many cases of utter failure, so many cases where the sufferer's final hope has been destroyed by such experiments. Private administration of treatment is not successful. The friendship existing between a physician and his patient must often disarm the former and incapacitate him for the strict dealing that is required in a treatment like mine. The mere fact that in caring for a friend or one of his regular patients, the doctor feels unwilling to exact a definite charge in advance is a certain handicap here, as is also the fact that each patient needs continual watching, and no doctor can afford to devote his entire time and constant medical attention to one patient. The average doctor in private practice, moreover, finds it impossible to secure upon demand nurses of sufficient moral responsibility and medical assistants of sufficient technical training to cooperate with him in the work. Above all, I find that only when the patient is on premises other than his own, in unfamiliar surroundings, where he is subject to a strict and inviolable discipline, can the best results be obtained. The doctor who administers this treatment, if he is to win, must have every advantage. Hospital surroundings, unfamiliar nurses, and strange assistant doctors are of great value. But payment in advance may be regarded as the most effective means for inducing the patient to complete the necessary course. An amazing number of people have come to me who have confessed that while they have from time to time tried other treatments, they have never completed one of them. Others come in a skeptical frame of mind. I can mention one such who had been 3 times to Europe, each time on the advice of the very doctor who, as the patient was aware, had been responsible for his forming the habit. No physician in private practice should ever attempt to relieve a patient from a drug habit in a manner incidental to the conduct of his practice, though it is nevertheless true that the temptation for doctors to attempt this are extraordinary. A patient who becomes aware that his physician knows of a treatment which will bring relief is likely to bring to bear upon the physician every possible pressure in the effort to induce him to administer it. The doctor must be liberal indeed who, having made such an attempt and failed to achieve good results with it, will acknowledge that he was mistaken at the start. The necessity of a fixed charge for the treatment. The advantage of a definite charge, paid in advance, was a discovery that I made early in my work. With a large portion of my patients, it would otherwise have been impossible for me to obtain the definite medical result which has characterized my work. It is quite impossible to make an intelligently satisfactory mental or physical diagnosis of any patient brought to me until he has been entirely freed from the drug which he has been taking. As soon as this has been fully accomplished, it is possible to consider the case carefully. It is also necessary to make an invariable rule that no person entering my institution for treatment shall be permitted to come into contact with any other person who is there for treatment, for there can be nothing psychologically worse than the discussion of symptoms and the exchange of experiences among people under treatment. It is also a rule that in the institution, physicians employed in the establishment shall not become intimate with the patients or spend with them any time not necessarily devoted to professional investigation and attendance. Nurses also must be as businesslike as possible in their relationships with patients, and must do as little hand-holding and sympathizing as possible, even in the cases of ultra-nervous women patients. It is a principle of the average sanatorium to encourage the sympathetic nurse. Wittingly or unwittingly, the old-time sanatorium made a practice of manufacturing habitual sanatorium inmates. The most hopeless cases I have ever seen have been those who have become inured to wearing sanatorium stripes. Such will never change their tailor till their pocketbook becomes empty. Another detail of my treatment, not easily compassed in the average sanatorium, is to consider every case as an individual case, to be dealt with individually. In private practice, this is often overlooked, and to this I also attribute many failures in treatment. The individuality of every case must be borne in mind not only throughout the treatment itself, but afterward, during the period of recuperation. The case itself is sure to indicate in some measure the further treatment which should be followed in a period immediately succeeding the patient's discharge from my institution, and very frequently indicates, in fact, the necessity for consultation with other specialists and for a surgical operation. After the patient has been relieved of drugs, comes the time to begin the necessary physical upbuilding by means of exercise. Although I may have seemed to condemn the sanatorium, I must add now that some institutions are specially qualified to assist in this building up process. Some health building institutions that devote their entire attention to strengthening their patients by means of physical exercise are doing wonderfully good work. The fact that my methods in treating these cases have prevented me, and will prevent me, from becoming directly or indirectly interested in any institution other than my own, in New York City, gives me a freedom in offering advice to patients concerning what they should do after they have left my care, that I should not feel that if my institution were operating upon the old time, keep them as long as you can plan. I find it possible to suggest physical exercise and even professional training to those who especially need it with entire disinterestedness, just as I find it possible to suggest to some an investigation of some religious influence. It must be laid down as an axiom that the patient must have a mental as well as a physical change before the treatment can accomplish all the good of which it is capable. Such a mental change is highly improbable in the comfortable surroundings of the average sanatorium. No man or woman ever achieved it by sitting on a pleasant veranda in an easy chair, exchanging tales of symptoms with other invalids. The reason for the fixed charge. The principal consideration which has influenced me in shaping my policy of a definite charge and limiting the length of stay of my patients has been the fact that I find it impossible when the effect of the drug has been perfectly eliminated to hold most of the patients under restraint. The man who has won freedom from his habit feels sure of himself. He desires to get away, and he is not afraid to go out into the world, where it may be possible for him to get the drug again. He will not yield to the temptation to get it, partly because he will not want it, and partly because he knows the horror of the habit and does not wish to become involved in it again. As a matter of fact, one of the hardest tasks I have is that of inducing people to stay as long with us as they think necessary, although their prolonged stay means no additional payment to us and no additional expense to them. This is one of the principal arguments against colonization, and it is as much an argument against the average municipal or state institution as it is against the average sanatorium. The theory of colonization in this matter is all wrong. The question of a definite charge has as much influence on my own attitude as on that of the patient. From the fact that I know when a patient enters my house that I can get no further money from him or her beyond the advance payment, I gain a distinct advantage. I do not feel it necessary to cater to my patient's whims, nor do I feel it necessary to sacrifice any portion of the necessary routine of the treatment, because the patient may be rich or influential, and may make extraordinary demands upon me. All that I have to do is to go ahead along those lines, which I know are effective and will gain results. The effect of this system is equally admirable upon the members of my medical staff, for our efforts are devoted not to keeping the patient as long as possible for the purpose of increasing revenue, but to get rid of him as quickly as possible, so that the profit will be relatively large. That it is to his advantage, as well as to mine, to see that the treatment is complete and effective before the patient leaves is obvious. These methods take into consideration my own and my patient's psychology. A man who deals with this type of patient needs every advantage which he can get, for invariably he is dealing with abnormalities. Physical defects revealed by treatment. The treatment itself is certain to uncover these abnormalities, revealing whether or not they are due to physical causes. It becomes very quickly evident if there is any real physical reason why a patient is not eligible for treatment, as in the case of an incurable and painful physical ailment. No matter how careful and frank a patient's statements may be, or how elaborate the diagnosis that his physician has transmitted to me, no matter how elaborately careful are the preliminary examinations made by my own physician, it is not until the drug has been entirely eliminated that we find it possible to make a real intelligent diagnosis. The symptoms of disease, however, are sure to appear before the first part of the treatment is completed. It is a standard policy of my hospital at once to inform a patient who has proved to be physically ineligible, and to return to him his fee. This method of procedure has made us careful before accepting patients to study their histories, for naturally, we do not wish to do any preliminary work and then return the fee in full. We accept no patient for treatment until we are provided with a careful and detailed history of his case, and it is upon a large collection of such histories that I have based many of the theories embodied in the subject matter of this book. It is especially those detailed histories which have enabled me to fix with some accuracy of judgment the circumstances leading up to the formation of most drug habits. In our invariable practice of returning the fee and discharging the patient whom we find ineligible for treatment, we have surely taken a step in advance. There is scarcely an institution of this sort in the United States to which a patient might write, "I am taking drugs," without receiving in reply the invitation, "Come to us and we will treat you," implying that we will give the treatment whether or not an examination of the patient shows that he is one who can benefit from it. Duty of the medical profession. The victim of drugs, whether he is rich or poor, old or young, good or bad, deserves the public sympathy in a measure scarcely equaled by any other class. These folk are sick folk in every way I can possibly think of. I am attempting to see to it that they are protected by every safeguard from being victimized. It is my hope that through continual and untiring education, I may force the state medical institutions throughout the country to assume their rightful responsibility in providing proper care for drug victims who have slight means or none. I purpose to work toward the awakening of the medical profession to its responsibility, not only in regard to the growth of new crops of drug users, but to the care and relief or sequestration from medical practice of those among its own members whose condition warrants action. Perhaps this last step should be the first one to be taken. I have given it much thought, and I can see only one way out of the veritably infernal tangle in which the medical profession has enmeshed itself. That would involve a conference between delegates from the medical societies of the various states to form a plan whereby the medical profession as a whole or in groups might establish and support an institution or a number of institutions. These should be backed by the most eminent and conscientious men in the profession. They should be managed by men fully competent, and should be open not only to physicians who need treatment and are unable to pay for it at a private institution, but to all patients, in the certainty that there they will receive the proper treatment, properly administered, and at a reasonable charge. I propose furthermore that every institution under private management in the United States shall by law be held responsible for its methods of treatment. Legislation to regulate sanatoriums. There should be the most drastic legislation compelling all physicians and institutions, accepting this class of patients for treatment, to report periodically to the Board of Health, which has jurisdiction in their district whenever, after a 3 weeks medical supervision, they still require the administration of habit-forming drugs. It is only reasonable that any institution accepting a patient for this treatment and failing to secure favorable results within a period of 21 days should report the case to the authorities, giving detailed reasons for the failure of the patient to respond to treatment. The general adoption of this rule of procedure would mean that a class of unfortunates who have never had any protection from any source would be immediately provided with definite medical help. An accompanying provision would insist that patients who for physical reasons are found to be ineligible for treatment unable, that is, to exist in comfort without regular doses of their drug, will be relieved of all sense of disgrace arising from this necessity, and will be preserved from victimization, and will find it possible to get the drug without difficulty and at reasonable prices, if necessary, from the boards of health themselves. If this plan accomplished nothing more than to prevent the operation of medical fraud against sufferers for a period longer than 3 weeks, it would even then have accomplished an extraordinary good. I have in my present hospital only 50 beds, and as a rule I receive and discharge about 4 patients a day. Were my institution operated along the colonization lines, which are common in the United States, the volume of business which I handle in a year, running well above 1,000 patients, would require not 50 but at least 500 beds, and rooms in proportion. This statement of the exact situation of my institution may possibly explain existing conditions in some others. It must not be understood that I attribute all the efforts at colonizing drug users to unworthy motives. Much of it has been due to the complete ignorance of the medical profession in regard to this form of affliction. Finding itself unable intelligently to cope with conditions, it seeks the line of least resistance and adopts the colonizing sanatorium, with all its evils, as the best plan that can be found. When I first took up this work, I went for information and assistance, not to humble the members of the medical profession, but to the most eminent men whom I could find. Even these men invariably admit their ignorance of the nature of the drug habit and the means for its relief. I was told by some of the best known neurologists in the world that out of the thousands of patients whom they and their confreres have sent to the best known and most conscientiously operated institutions in the country, not one had really been helped. They assured me that if I had found something which would give actual and material aid in any degree to even 5% of the drug victims who were sent to me for treatment, I would be doing more than any man had ever done before. End of chapter 10. Habits That Handicap by Charles B. Towns. Chapter 11. Preventive Measures for the Drug Evil. Early in my investigations into the proper facilities for the medical treatment of drug users, it became apparent that this could not be properly carried out in the patient's own environment, in a general hospital where new facilities had not been introduced, or in the usual sanatorium. It became necessary for me then to outline some system by which the medical profession might properly take up the work, and to suggest some basis on which the medical men of various states might combine in an effort to remove the treatment of these sufferers from the hands of the irresponsible. Some, if not the majority, of the worthiest subjects of the drug habit are people who cannot pay large sums or travel long distances in their search for relief. It seemed clear, therefore, that state institutions should be equipped with facilities and knowledge for dealing with this affliction. The need for practical instruction. At the present time, there is in existence no clinic or practical place of demonstration where a doctor can get competent instruction in this important branch of medical work. I hope the time will come when it may be possible for me to offer to the medical profession a clinic where the professional student may prepare for this line of effort as effectively as he may now prepare himself for any special work, like nose and throat diseases. This can come about only through some arrangement in which I have no financial interest. Skepticism of the medical profession. I am fully aware that I must first overcome a strong undercurrent of skepticism among the members of the medical profession. The efficacy of the treatment must be proved. Even among the best informed physicians, it is a popular belief that the treatment which I announce as simple is really an impossibility. No matter what the doctor has hoped that he might do, he has been told by textbooks and articles in medical periodicals that it cannot be done. This fallacious teaching must be counteracted before much can be accomplished, and in the progress of the work, many traditions of the profession must be violated. before he can hope to accomplish anything of importance in the administration of my method of treatment. The physician must understand that the length of time a drug user has been taking the drug, the quantity that he has taken, and the manner of its administration are matters of no consequence. Short histories and small amounts, long histories and large amounts, are all one when it comes to the administration of this treatment. I went to Dr. Richard C. Cabot of Boston with a letter of introduction from Dr. Alexander Lambert of New York, whom he knew well and admired. He listened to my statement of the facts, which I have just set forth. "I have heard what you say, but I shall not believe it until it has been demonstrated to me," he declared. I demonstrated it and convinced him. A similar skepticism remains general throughout the medical profession. The experience that the medical profession has already had in New York State as the result of prohibitive legislation indicates that many problems that arise immediately after the drug is put beyond the reach of those who have acquired the habit. It is only natural that the unscrupulous should seek to take advantage of the opportunities created by this situation. Without proper treatment, a habitual drug user cannot endure the agony of deprivation until a definite physiological change has occurred. So that unless the medical profession is informed of this fact, and the community at large is provided with facilities for the administration of the required treatment, it is almost inevitable that restrictive measures will be followed immediately by the victimization of the unfortunate by the unscrupulous. One detail of the peril to society which may accrue from a general cessation of the drug traffic without the provision of proper facilities for the care of those who have been its victims is that those who are accustomed to drugs, on being suddenly deprived of them, almost invariably turn to alcohol for stimulation and, without being the least relieved of the drug habit, with abnormal speed become alcoholics. Modern society presents few spectacles of suffering more acute than that endured by the drunken drug fiend. Few persons, moreover, are so dangerous to its welfare. Medical ethics. Constantly I must lay emphasis upon the responsibility of the physician in regard to drug habits. This phase of the subject must be an ever-recurring one, because the whole unpleasant situation has grown out of medical ignorance. While treatment for drug users is at last making headway, for a long time experimentation had no chance, save with a small number of broad-minded and bright-minded doctors who were able to shake off the shackles that held the less intelligent members of their profession. When I made public the formulas of my treatment, I did not understand this phase of medical ethics. I assumed that certain dangers might arise from the probable activities of the omnipresent medical faker, who, without any genuine effort to administer my treatment properly, would advertise it widely and thus victimize the innocent. I also assumed that the medical profession would eagerly grasp the idea, put the treatment into operation to their own benefit and that of the world at large, and by the very beneficence of their work far more than offset the harm the charlatans would do. Both of these assumptions proved incorrect. The fakers avoided even counterfeiting my treatment, because the articles which had announced it in the medical and lay press had made its brevity clear to the public. They did not care to promote any treatment in which their victims would be justified in demanding immediate relief. From that real peril the community was thus saved. But the general indifference of the medical profession was equally surprising and at first somewhat discouraging. I have since decided, however, that this was perhaps fortunate, for as the work develops, it becomes more and more apparent that it is strictly hospital treatment, and cannot often be successfully administered in the environment of the home or in the regular course of a general practitioner's daily work. In another part of this book, I shall have more to say about the medical buzzards who, working outside of medical ethics, and in defiance of the usual admirable spirit of the profession as a whole, without regard to financial or ethical honesty, indulge in whatever practices seem to promise them the greatest profit. How dangerous these men are not only to the patient, but to the profession has many times been illustrated. Various medical discoveries imported from abroad or achieved and announced by eminent American medical men, have brought flocks of unscrupulous practitioners to New York, not with the progressive desire to study and honestly apply these new theories for the benefit of their patients, but with the idea of learning barely enough about them to enable them to offer credulous sufferers cheap and worthless counterfeits at exorbitant rates. Where secret methods have been heralded, they have bid against one another frantically to secure locality privileges, working to this end with all the fierce competitive enthusiasm shown by eager commercialists seeking county rights to a practical and popular patent flat iron. It is my earnest hope that the wave of reform which has begun in New York State, and which will undoubtedly carry new and effective drug legislation into every state of the Union before it loses its forward impulse, may not revitalize these unworthy schemers. It was partly the hope of preventing this evil that led to the writing of this book. The progress of intelligent legislation will fill the land with much suffering from the tortures of drug deprivation. Therefore, events have placed a solemn obligation upon the medical profession to satisfy itself of the efficacy of my treatment, even though a new organization for that purpose should be necessary. After the profession is assured of the value of the treatment, many should achieve competence in its administration. Then it will become a matter of duty to see that every community is provided with facilities and a staff of experts sufficient to meet the special needs that may arise there. If such an organization should be formed, I should be glad to devote my services to it. The author's experience with the drug habit. My opportunities for observation in this field have extended over 14 years of constant study. They have included investigations in the Orient and Europe, as well as in the United States, and have dealt with patients of every class. Early in my work, I found it difficult to secure subjects, and presently saw that I could do so only by personally searching the underworld for them. It was a complicated task, full of unexpected problems. As I could not engage salaried people for the carrying out of the details of the treatment, it became necessary for me to do everything except the medical work, and to assume all except the medical responsibility. But what I at first deemed a hardship proved in the end to be an advantage, for if I had had plenty of money with which to carry on my work, I should never have mastered its details. It may be that the need for making the work strictly self-supporting from the start led to one of my first important psychological discoveries: that any person worth saving is either able to pay a reasonable amount for treatment, or can make the price of it a deferred obligation of such a character that it will certainly be met. The experience from which this and other statements in this book have been deduced is not an experience gained from casual or even regular daily calls of a few minutes or a few hours upon the patients under treatment, but is due to years in which I have frequently spent 22 hours out of every 24 in the same building with them and subject to their constant call. After having proved the efficacy of treatment at home, it seemed advisable to make a journey to the Orient, where drug habits were notoriously more common than elsewhere. It was the desire to study them at first hand, and literally by wholesale, which led me to China, where I opened 3 hospitals, and in the course of 11 months, supervised the treatment for the opium habit of over 4,000 Chinese. During this period I treated all who presented themselves. The ages of those to whom relief was given ranged from 18 to 76. Among the 4,000 patients, not one fatality occurred, although many of them were extreme cases, and I was able to obtain the assistance of only one foreign physician who could be considered responsible. The rest of the work was done by untrained Chinese boys who administered the capsules at stated hours, and not one of whom was capable of intelligently counting a patient's pulse. I have said that not one fatality occurred. It is pleasant for me to add that during the whole 14 years of my practice, although I have had thousands under treatment, many of them in exceedingly bad physical condition at the time the treatment was begun, and with their drug symptoms complicated by various and serious physical ailments, and often accented by alcoholism, only 4 cases have died. Successful achievements in the cure of drug users. A new precedent had been established with cases of this character in the course of my hospital experience. For the first time, the treatment has been reduced to a definite hospital system, during which the resident physician is never divorced from his patient, and in the course of which complete and elaborate bedside histories and charts are kept. I have in my possession at the present moment the complete bedside notes of every patient to whom my treatment has ever been administered. I call attention to this fact because it shows that the work has not been hit or miss, but has been as carefully systematized and made as highly scientific as has been possible to make it. A second precedent has been set, as is proved by the fact that within a brief time, any case of drug or alcohol habit that is not complicated by physical disabilities due to other causes can be successfully treated in a few days without heroic methods and without risk. This has at once proved the fallacy of old methods. It has demonstrated how false, for instance, is the principle of colonization. As I have said, drug cases should never be colonized, and among alcoholics, only the absolutely hopeless inebriate should be subject to this method of treatment. With the latter, of course, there is no chance of real relief, so that here colonization offers a means of relieving society of all the burden upon the police, which the inebriate's freedom necessarily implies, and from a large part of the economic burden which his existence entails upon the community. Making sanatorium convicts. For drug users, colonization is the worst possible treatment that can be followed. From what I have known of the conduct of the average sanatorium at this time in the United States, I feel absolutely certain that no person can possibly be helped if sent there, and I am convinced that definite and virtually incalculable harm would be the most inevitable result of following such a course. Drug users, as well as alcoholics, who are sent officially or otherwise to institutions of this character, become what are called sanatorium convicts. These cases are virtually hopeless and are little less pitiable than that of the lifer in prison. There are in the United States many people of the better class who through no fault of their own have become afflicted with the drug habit, and who have drifted from bad to worse until a sanatorium has been the only recourse left. Treatment for drug and alcohol habits and treatment tending toward the recuperation of the patient cannot be carried out together with one patient or even simultaneously with several patients in the same institution. An understanding of this fact has placed me in an advantageous position for giving advice about whatever remains to be done when a patient is ready to leave my hospital. I have always worked in the closest and most perfect harmony with physicians who have sent cases to me, and have never permitted any of the doctors employed in my institution to visit a patient who has left my care. On the other hand, no physician who has brought a patient to my hospital has ever been divorced from him as a result of his stay with us. Accurate diagnosis possible after treatment. Physical revelations which follow the unpoisoning of patients frequently startle the patients themselves, as well as the physicians who have their well-being in charge for long periods. Nor are the mental revelations less astonishing. There have been many cases, after the unpoisoning was complete, in which a man or a woman has been found to be as seriously ailing mentally as others have been found ailing physically. Drugs and alcohol, especially drugs, have frequently been responsible for extraordinary mental and moral twists. But it must be maintained that the use of drug or liquor is usually the result rather than the cause of such conditions. There are many cases in which no type of medical help will bring about satisfactory permanent results, though other victims, after the elimination of alcohol or narcotics, quickly take their places as useful and admirable members of society. The problem confronting the physiologist after a patient has been relieved of a drug or drink habit is comparatively simple. If this relief makes diagnosis possible and reveals the existence of an unsuspected but curable ailment, the course to follow is obvious. With the psychologist, the problem is frequently far more complicated. The useless citizen who becomes a drug or drink user will remain a useless citizen after the drug or drink habit has been eliminated. To this class belong most of those who readily relapse into their old habits after the systems have been thoroughly cleared of the physiological demand for the substance of their habit. Thus perhaps the most important query of the psychologist interested in this work must ask after the treatment of a patient is, what is left of value, and what can be done with it? It is a curious fact that usually more is left in the case of a poor than in the case of a rich patient. No one is so hopeless as the vagrant rich. No man will ever make a reputation in work of this character who deals wholly or principally with people to whom money has no value. Unpoisoning the user is only the first step. My work has brought me to the conclusion that few physicians seem able accurately to classify their own patients. Even the specialists in psychology, who should be able to weigh all of the details of men's mental and moral as well as physical being, seems likely to go astray when he considers a psychology that has been affected either by drink or drugs. Many physicians seem to be imbued with the idea that after a patient has been through the process of treatment for a drug or drink habit, he will be entirely made over. But the fact is that the elimination of drugs or drink from a degenerate will not eliminate degeneracy. Nothing, in fact, will eliminate it except stopping the breeding of degenerates. In my work, I have found it necessary sometimes to seek advice from as many as half a dozen physical and psychological specialists in connection with one case. While instances have been very numerous, in which several specialists have been really required for the welfare of the patient, the need had been so thoroughly concealed by the patient's drug habit that it was not apparent until the effect of the drugs was thoroughly eliminated. Necessity for careful psychological study. In most instances, expert treatment for the medical condition after drug or drink elimination is as essential as expert attention from the doctor of medicine, and if success is to be achieved, must be regarded as an entirely separate task. Habitual users of drug or drink are literally human derelicts. The symptoms of their true condition are submerged, and to clear them of their concealed weaknesses, it is necessary to lift them like a barnacle-ridden hulk into the dry dock for investigation and repair. I regard as a preferred risk among the victims of the drug habits those who have acquired it through the administration of a narcotic by physicians in time of pain or illness. Such a case, if treated before too great a deterioration has taken place, may be considered almost certain of relief, provided no other ailment discloses itself. On the other hand, where the drug habit is the direct or indirect result of alcoholic dissipation or sexual excesses, or is a social vice, the case is extra hazardous. Here the lack of moral standards and the loss of pride are serious handicaps. These matters are of extreme importance to the physician who is considering the care or treatment of cases of a drug habit. That he should classify his subjects of investigation, recognizing the hopeful ones and admitting the hopeless to be hopeless, is essential to successful work. He must know the material with which he has to work. Familiarity with his material is as necessary to him as it is to the carpenter. Many cases have been brought to us that we have declined to accept because we could hope to accomplish nothing with them. Not long after I began my work, I tried to help a man against my better judgment. I felt reasonably sure that he lacked the worthy qualities that would make him cling to and appreciate whatever advantages the treatment might afford. My estimate of his character proved to be correct. The man relapsed and became a traveling liability on me, a reproach against my institution and my treatment. The hopeless case. I have already said that the idle rich, to whom money has no value, cannot usually be classed among hopeful subjects for treatment. The same may be said of those for whom others take financial responsibility, paying the cost of their treatment. If such cases do not already belong in the human scrap heap, this mistaken kindness is very likely to place them there. However, I believe that those among this class who have become public charges and refuse to work should be forced to do so by state or municipal authority. Society or their own families should not bear the burden of their useless existence. They should be segregated in some place where they will be physically comfortable, where they may be made industrious and useful, and where a separation of the sexes will prevent the increase of their worthless kind. My judgment is that the man or the woman who through the vagaries of his or her own disposition has once been forced to wear the stripes of disgrace is likely to employ the same tailor during the rest of his or her life. Such persons will become permanent boarders at one or another of the places provided for the seclusion of the worthless. It is well that where they are first sequestered, they should be permanently kept. Through this course alone, society will be spared the periodical havoc they will be sure to work during their intervals of freedom. Impersonal relations between physician and patient necessary. Certain dangers inevitably arise where an intimacy exists between doctor and patient, since few physicians are morally so constituted that they will order a prosperous patient to do this or that or find another physician. In other words, instances have not been uncommon where the toleration of physicians for unfortunate practices among their patients has had its basis, and perhaps one not entirely inexcusable in these days of high pressure from professional competition in self-interest. Social relations also have often led physicians to tolerate practices that they knew to be harmful to their patients and to the community. A patient who is a member of an influential club or a fashionable church is likely to be an asset of exceptional value to the physician whom he patronizes, for he is likely to recommend him to his friends. Good business management on the physician's part leads him to keep such a patient good-natured and comfortable, and to keep him comfortable means, among other things, to keep him free from pain. Where the patient suffers from an incurable malady, the use of drugs is not only excusable, but commendable. But instances are all too frequent where the malady is not incurable, but only puzzling and beyond the average practitioner's power of diagnosis, so that he covers up his ignorance by the administration of pain-deadening substances. Patients who invariably and promptly pay their bills are sometimes in a position where they can tell a doctor what to do, whereas it should be the doctor's unalterable resolution to retain the upper hand. Instances of this kind are far less grave in connection with the use of alcohol than in the connection with the use of drugs. The physician may be said almost never to play any part in the establishment of an alcoholic habit among his patients, while he has surely played a most important part in the spread of drug habits. End of chapter 11. Habits that Handicap by Charles B. Towns. Chapter 12. Classification of habit-forming drugs. Opium is the basis of almost all the habit-forming drugs. There is no other drug known to the pharmacist that has a similar action or can be used as a substitute when a definite tolerance of it has been established. The chemists have given us more than 20 different salts or alkaloids of opium in various forms and under as many different trade names, and I regret to say that they are busy working in their laboratories to put upon the market injurious drugs under various supposedly harmless disguises, but intended in the end only to deceive. Morphine. Morphine is the active principle of opium, and until a few years ago, only crude opium or morphine was used for medical requirements. Morphine is intrinsically far worse than opium itself, for opium has certain properties which probably counteract the effect of the morphine that it contains. But morphine is not only the active principle, but the actively evil principle of the drug. The user of morphine always retains his faculties. He is usually capable of intelligent conversation. Unlike the alcoholic's brain, his is not inflamed. It is impossible for the physician intelligently to discuss his symptoms with an alcoholic. With a victim of drugs, on the other hand, he can thresh out every detail of the case. Later, codeine was placed upon the market, supposedly an innocent alkaloid of opium, non-habit forming, but still capable of eliminating pain and suffering due to illness or injury. After taking up this work, my investigation soon led me to realize that it was not the quantity of the drug taken which produced the drug habit, but the regularity of the dosage. I also found from my clinical comparisons that codeine has only 1/8 the strength of morphine, yet in the end, just as surely a producer of the drug habit similar to that of morphine itself. Heroin. At this writing, the most harmful form of opiate with which we have to deal with is heroin. This preparation of morphine was first put upon the market by German chemists about 15 years ago, the word heroin being nothing more than a trade name. It was first used in cough mixtures and was widely discussed in the medical and pharmaceutical press, where it was claimed that all the harm of morphine had virtually been eliminated in this product, which, without having the depressing effects of morphine, at the same time preserved its stimulating effect. A great number of physicians themselves have acquired the habit of taking opiates in this form, believing at the outset that they were not harmful drugs. My investigation soon showed me that heroin is 3 times as strong as morphine in its action, and for that reason, its use sets up definite tolerance more quickly than any other form of opiate. For the same reason, it shows more quickly a deleterious effect upon the human system, the mental, moral, and physical deterioration of its takers being more marked than in the case of any other form of opiate. Until the federal pure food law was passed, we did not know that many of the well-known advertised medical preparations contain quantities of various salts or alkaloids of opium. The unsuspecting users of patent medicine were making themselves confirmed drug users unwittingly, and did not realize how necessary the habit had become to them until, for one reason or another, they had been deprived of their usual daily dosage. The reader may imagine my surprise when, although a layman, I found that the physician, to whom we had looked for guidance in administering and prescribing these drugs, knew nothing about them beyond their physiological action, that their medical training both in college and in clinics had left them in virtual ignorance of the whole question. The physician freely prescribed or administered these various drugs, while laymen were able to buy over the counters of druggists prescriptions containing definite quantities of them. Unknowingly, the doctor and the druggist were creating great numbers of drug fiends. Physicians do not yet know over how long a period such drugs can be administered in regular daily dosage without setting up a tolerance, after which the patient cannot be deprived of the drug. If the public had been better advised on this subject, it would have been able to protect itself and would have been more careful about what it took. Cocaine. Outside the opium group, there is at present only one other drug that must be considered as habit-forming, and that is cocaine. The prostitution of this drug from its proper uses is absolutely inexcusable. It was first used medicinally about 30 years ago, and as an anesthetic only. Its administration upon the nose by specialists in that field of surgery soon established the fact that it not only deadened tissue, but set up a certain stimulation for which the time being made one feel abnormally strong or mentally active. This was the beginning of its common use in the shape of so-called catarrh cures. Only a small quantity, from 5 to 10%, was used. The tissue of the nose is very susceptible to the action of drugs. When it is applied in this way, the circulation takes up the drug as quickly as if taken hypodermically. Unscrupulous chemists and physicians have unloaded upon the world a drug which is beneficial when taken medicinally, but one that has reaped a harvest of irresponsible victims, in which murder, all forms of crime, and mental and moral degeneracy have conspicuously figured, and all for financial gain. The habit was first generally spread through the medium of catarrh cures. Cocaine contracts and deadens the tissue with which it comes in contact, and thus, as in the case of catarrh, relieves the patient from discomfort, making him feel, indeed, as if there were no nose on his face. Its effect, however, lasts only from 20 to 30 minutes. This is one of the reasons why the cocaine habit is so easily formed. A man taking any powerful stimulant is sure to feel a corresponding depression when the effect of that stimulant has died away, and it then becomes necessary for him to take more of the drug in order to buoy himself up and restore himself to the point of normality. It is among cocaine users, therefore, not a yearning for any abnormally pleasurable sensation which sends them back again and again to their dosage, but merely their desire to be measurably restored to the comfort which is natural to the normal state. This must be apparent, however, that as soon as it has become necessary for anyone to resort to the use of a drug in order to rise to the normal, there has been a marked depreciation, physical or mental, and probably both. This explains the fact that many criminals are found to be cocaine users. No drug so quickly brings about a mental and physical deterioration. It is virtually certain to be a shortcut to one of two public institutions, the prison or the madhouse. It will send the average person to the prison first because it is an expensive drug, and the craving for it more than likely to exhaust his financial resources, and then drive him to theft. It is the most expensive of all drug habits. I have known victims who have habitually used 120 grains a day, at a cost of about $70 a week. This undoubtedly explains the great number who have been made criminals by using cocaine. One who uses it thereby diminishes his earning capacity, while, on the other hand, one who must have it must have money, and much of it. It may be that this matter of cost explains why the underworld has suddenly taken up heroin instead of cocaine. The former is much cheaper. Hypnotics. While I have only touched upon the opium group and cocaine, I wish to put myself on record now as saying that there is no class of drugs so sure in the end to bring about a deterioration of physical being as the frequent use of the hypnotic group or coal tar products, the sleep producers. I have never seen more pitiable cases than those who have come to me after they have been taking regularly, during a considerable period, some cure for sleeplessness. This habit not only produces an extreme narcotic condition, but changes the entire temperament of a person. It will turn the most beautiful character into an extreme case of moral degeneracy. Insomnia, headaches, and such ailments spring from a disorganized physical condition. Trying to alleviate them by the use of powerful drugs does not remove the cause, but compounds the physical disabilities which produce these unfortunate physical results. Someday, I hope to see as stringent a legal regulation of the sale of these drugs used for this common purpose as there now is of opium and its products and cocaine. Sleeping powders or hypnotics. The time cannot be far distant when both federal and state governments will recognize the danger that lies in the unrestricted sale by druggists and the uncurbed administration by physicians of sleeping powders or hypnotics. It cannot be denied by anyone who is thoroughly familiar with the subject of habit-forming drugs that in such substances may lie a peril comparable to that inherent in cocaine and opium compounds. Hypnotics of many varieties can be obtained at any drugstore in the United States without a doctor's certificate. The sale of bromides is absolutely unrestricted. The many and varied coal tar products, of which veronal is the leader, with trional, sulfonal, medinol as close followers, and the numerous proprietary remedies, such as somnos, neurondia, bromidia, Peacock's bromides, etc., may be mentioned as preparations which are widely advertised and openly and energetically sold, and all of which are definitely dangerous. Coal tar products. Preparations for headaches and neuralgia are notably dangerous. There can be no doubt, of the necessity for legal restriction of the sale of anticamnia, phenalgin, orangine, Kohler's headache remedy, shac, all coal tar products, notable for their production of anemia and depression, and undoubtedly responsible for the presence of many men and women in the madhouses of the land. The chemist whose genius is responsible for the introduction of caffeine, to overcome the depressing effect of some of the other component parts of these preparations, has put hundreds of thousands of dollars into the pockets of the manufacturing druggists, and has saddled the world with a great and unnecessary weight of physical and mental degeneration. The peril of the drugstore. Not least among these preparations that have most importantly contributed to the tragic army of drug users in the United States have been various diarrhea remedies and other bowel correctives containing a large amount of straight opium. Morphine, opium, and heroin appear in many cough mixtures in habit-forming quantities and are offered for sale everywhere save in New York State, where recent legislation somewhat restricts the traffic. Indeed, in every state except New York, there are few druggists who do not make up and sell preparations of their own containing codeine, morphine, heroin, or some of the derivatives of opium. No druggist has a right to prescribe any of these powerful drugs. The American public has fallen into the bad habit of trusting the druggist when it should go to the physician. A dozen times every day, in the experience of the average American druggist, a customer enters who says, "I want something to make me sleep," or "I want something to cure my headache," without hesitation and without blame, for with him the custom has probably been unconsciously built up. The druggist reaches for his shelf and dispenses preparations in which the utmost peril lurks, preparations containing ingredients which should be sold only on the prescription of a physician. Under the present law, as I think it exists in every state, druggists cannot prescribe, but they can advise customers to purchase advertised preparations and those which they themselves compound. Only a very powerful drug can stop a headache as quickly and completely as Americans have come to demand. The preparation must be strong enough to deaden disordered nerves, and being chosen because it will be generally effective, not selectively effective, as in the case of a remedy chosen after an intelligent diagnosis has revealed the nature of the trouble to be treated, it is virtually certain to have no curative qualities whatever. Hundreds of deaths have resulted from unwisely experimenting with such preparations. Most of us have peculiar idiosyncrasies with regard to certain drugs. I have seen patients who could not take so much as 2 grains of veronal or trianol without flushing, itching, and similar symptoms. With such people, large doses might bring about serious results and even death. End of chapter 12.
Thank you for watching. Do subscribe to my channel and give your valuable suggestion in comment box.